Ali Abdal. Feel-good productivity, how to do more of what matters to you. Introduction. Merry Christmas, Ollie. Try not to kill anyone. With these words, my consultant breezily hung up the phone, leaving me to handle an entire ward of patients alone. I was a newly qualified junior doctor, and 3 weeks previously I'd made a rookie error forgetting to fill out a form to request the holidays off. Now here I was, managing a hospital ward on my own on Christmas Day. Things had started badly and rapidly got worse. When I arrived at the hospital, I was met by an avalanche of patient histories, diagnostic reports and cryptic scam requests that would have made more sense to a seasoned archaeologist than our on-call radiologist. Within minutes, I was confronted by the day's first emergency, a man in his 50s who had collapsed from a severe cardiac arrest. And then one of the nurses informed me that a patient urgently needed a manual evacuation. If you know, you know. At 10:30 am, I looked around the ward. Nurse Janice was sprinting up and down corridor in a panic, her arms overflowing with room-4 drips and medication charts. On Corridor B, a stubborn elderly patient was loudly demanding his misplaced dentures. Corridor C had been taken over by a drunken exile from the emergency department, wandering the corridor and shouting Olive. I never learned who Olive was, and every minute somebody was making a new demand. Dr. Ollie, can you check on Mrs. Johnson's fever? Dr. Ollie, can you help with Mr. Singh's elevated potassium? I soon found myself starting to panic. Medical school hadn't prepared me for anything like this. Until then, I had always been quite an effective student. Whenever the going got tough, my strategy was simple: work harder. It was a method that had got me into medical school 7 years previously. It had allowed me to secure a handful of publications in academic journals. It had even allowed me to launch a business while I studied. Discipline was the only productivity system I knew. And it worked. Except now it wasn't working. Since starting as a doctor a few months previously, I'd felt like I was drowning. Even when I worked late into the night, I couldn't see the number of patients or finish the paperwork that I needed to. My mood was suffering too. I'd enjoyed my medical training to be a doctor, but I was finding the actual job utterly depressing, constantly worrying that I might make a mistake that would kill someone. I stopped sleeping, friendships faded, my family stopped hearing from me. And I just kept working harder. And now this. Christmas Day, alone on a hospital ward, failing to get through my shift. Everything came to a head when I dropped a tray of medical supplies, sending syringes flying across the linoleum floor. As I forlornly looked down at my damp scrubs, I realized I had to figure things out for my dream of becoming a surgeon was slit through my fingers. That night, I hung up my stethoscope, grabbed a mince pie, and opened my laptop. I'd once been so productive, I thought. What had I forgotten? During my first year at medical school, I'd become obsessed with the secrets of productivity. I'd stayed up night after night making notes on hundreds of articles, blog posts, and videos promising the key to optimal performance. All the gurus emphasized the importance of hard slog. A Muhammad Ali quote came up a lot. I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit, suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion. As Christmas turned to Boxing Day, I stayed up poring over my old notes and wondered whether that was where I was going wrong. Did I just need to regain my old work ethic? But when I returned to work the next day resolving to just do more, it made no difference. Even though I stayed on the ward until midnight and even though I was reciting Muhammad Ali's line to myself during my toilet breaks, I wasn't getting through my paperwork any quicker. My patients were still getting a tired, ineffective version of Ali. And I was still displaying a conspicuous lack of Christmas cheer. At the end of my hardest day yet, I felt completely underwater. And then from nowhere, I remembered some words of wisdom from my old tutor, Dr. Barclay. If the treatment isn't working, question the diagnosis slowly, and then all at once, I started to doubt all the productivity advice I had absorbed. Did success really require suffering? What was success anyway? Was suffering even sustainable? Did it make sense that feeling overwhelmed would be good for getting things done? Did I have to trade my health and happiness for, well, anything? It would take me a few months. But I was stumbling my way to a revelation that everything I'd been told about success was wrong. I couldn't hustle my way to becoming a good doctor. Working harder wasn't going to bring me happiness. And there was another path to fulfillment, one that wasn't lined with constant anxiety, sleepless nights, and a concerning dependence on caffeine. I didn't have all the answers, not by a long shot. But for the first time, I could make out the beginnings of an alternative approach. An approach that didn't hinge on exhausting the hard work, but on understanding what made hard work feel better. An approach that focused on my well-being first, and used that well-being to drive my focus and motivation second. An approach I would come to refer to as feel-good productivity. The surprising secrets of feel-good productivity back in medical school, my obsession with productivity had led me to tack on an extra year to earn a psychology degree. As I started putting together the pieces of feel-good productivity, I remembered a study I'd been tested on, one that involved a candle, a book of matches, and a box of thumbtacks. Picture yourself with these 3 objects before you. Your task is to stick the candle to the corkboard on the wall so that, when it's lit, the candle wax won't drip onto the table below. You find yourself puzzling over the items, turning them over in your hands. Can you think of the solution? When presented with this problem, most people only consider the candle, the matches, and the thumbtacks. But more innovative minds recognize the potential of the thumbtack box. The optimal solution to the puzzle involves viewing the thumbtack box not just as a container, but as a candle holder. This is the candle problem, a classic test of creative thinking. First developed by Carl Duncker and published posthumously in 1945, it has since been used in countless studies testing everything from cognitive flexibility to the psychological fallout of stress. In the late 1970s, psychologist Alice Eisen used it as the basis for an influential experiment to study how mood affects people's creativity. Eisen began by dividing her volunteers into two groups. One group was given a small gifted bag of candy before facing the candle problem. The other group started a task with no such incentive. The theory went that those who were given the sweets would have a more positive mood when they tried to solve the puzzle. Eisen found something interesting. Those whose moods were subtly improved by the gift were significantly more successful in solving the candle problem. When I first read about Eisen's experiment during my psychology degree, I found it interesting but not exactly transformative. Personally, I'd never felt the overwhelming urge to stick a candle to a wall. But coming back to it as a junior doctor, I realized that Eisen's insight was quite profound. It suggested that feeling good doesn't just end with feeling good. It actually changes our patterns of thought and behavior. I now learned that the study had become the cornerstone of a wave of research exploring the way positive emotions affect many of our cognitive processes. It showed that when we're in a positive mood, we tend to consider a broader range of actions, be more open to new experiences, and better integrate the information we receive. In other words, feeling good boosts our creativity and our productivity. One of the first people to explore how exactly this works was Barbara Fredrickson. A professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Fredrickson is one of the leading figures in positive psychology, a relatively new branch of psychology that focuses on understanding and promoting happiness. In the late 1990s, Fredrickson proposed what she called the broaden and build theory of positive emotions. According to the broaden and build theory, positive emotions broaden our awareness and build our cognitive and social resources. Broaden refers to the immediate effect of positive emotions. When we're feeling good, our minds open up, we take in more information, and we see more possibilities around us. Consider the candle problem. In a positive mood, participants were able to see a broader range of potential solutions. Build refers to the long-term effects of positive emotions. When we experience positive emotions, we build up a reservoir of mental and emotional resources that can help us in the future, resources like resilience, creativity, problem-solving skills, social connections, and physical health. Over time, these two processes reinforce each other, creating an upward spiral of positivity, growth, and success. Positive emotions are the fuel that drives the engine of human flourishing. The theory suggests a whole new way of understanding the role of positive emotions in our lives. They are not just fleeting feelings that come and go without consequence. They are integral to our cognitive functioning, our social relationships, and our overall well-being. Positive emotions are the fuel that drives the engine of human flourishing. Why feel-good productivity works. When I first started learning about broaden and build, I caught a glimpse of a different way of thinking about my life. For years, I thought that by simply hustling harder I could achieve the things I wanted. If I wanted to be a good doctor, the life ahead of me would be defined by grinding, unrelenting work. Now I could see another way. Fredrickson's theory suggests that positive emotions change the way our brains operate. Step 1 is feeling better. Step 2 is doing more of what matters to us. But why? I wondered. The more I read, the more I realize that the explanations are varied and in some cases remain unclear. But scientists have started to home in on a few answers. First, feeling good boosts our energy. Most of us have felt an energy that's not strictly physical or biological, one that doesn't just come from sugar or carbohydrates, but from a mix of motivation, focus, and inspiration. It's the energy you feel when you're working on a particularly engrossing task or when you're surrounded by inspiring people. This energy has many different names. It's been labeled as emotional, spiritual, mental, or motivational energy by psychologists, zest, vitality, or energetic arousal by neuroscientists. But if researchers can't agree on what to name it, they do agree that it makes us focused, inspired, and motivated to pursue our goals. So what's the source of this mysterious energy? The short answer, feeling good. Positive emotions are bound up with a set of 4 hormones: endorphins, serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin, which are often labeled as the feel-good hormones. All of them allow us to accomplish more. Endorphins are often released during physical activity, stress, or pain, and bring about feelings of happiness and diminished discomfort, and elevated levels usually correlate with increased energy and motivation. Serotonin is connected to mood regulation, sleep, appetite, and overall feelings of well-being. It underpins our sense of contentment and gives us the energy to tackle tasks efficiently. Dopamine, or the reward hormone, is linked with motivation and pleasure, and its release provides a satisfaction that allows us to focus for longer. And oxytocin, known as the love hormone, is associated with social bonding, trust, and relationship building, which enhances our capacity to connect with others, boosts our mood, and, in turn, impacts our productivity. All this means that these feel-good hormones are the starting point of a virtuous cycle. When we feel good, we generate energy, which boosts our productivity. And this productivity leads to feelings of achievement, which make us feel good all over again. Second, feeling good reduces our stress. In addition to the broad and Unblock theory, Barbara Fredrickson also developed what psychologists call the undoing hypothesis. Fredrickson and her colleagues were interested in decades of research showing that negative emotions cause the release of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. This isn't a problem in the short term, it's the mechanism that motivates us to run from danger. But if we experience these negative sensations too often, we become riddled with anxiety and our physical health suffers. The continuous activation of these hormones can even increase the risk of developing heart disease and high blood pressure. Not ideal. Fredrickson wondered about the flip side. If negative emotions have these harmful physiological effects, then perhaps positive emotions could reverse them. Might feeling good reset the nervous system and put the body into a more relaxed state? To test this out, Fredrickson came up with a rather mean study. Researchers told a group of people that they had 1 minute to prepare a public speech that would be filmed and judged by their peers. Knowing that the fear of public speaking is practically universal, Fredrickson hypothesized that this would elevate the subject's levels of anxiety and stress. And it did. People reported feeling more anxious and experienced increases in heart rate and blood pressure. Next, the researchers randomly assigned participants to watch one of 4 films, 2 evoking mildly positive emotions, the 3rd neutral ones, and the 4th sad ones. And they then measured how long it took the participants to recover from the stress. Their findings were intriguing. The participants who watched the positive emotion films took significantly less time to return to their baseline state in terms of heart rate and blood pressure. And those who watched the sadness-evoking film took the longest time to return to baseline. This is the undoing hypothesis that positive emotions can undo the effects of stress and other negative emotions. If stress is the problem, then feeling good might just be the solution. But the final, and perhaps most transformative, implication of feel-good productivity goes well beyond any one task or project. Because third, feeling good enriches your life. In 2005, a team of psychologists read all the studies they could find on the complex relationship between happiness and success. They delved into 225 published papers which involved data from over 275,000 individuals. Their question, does success, as we're often told, make us happier, or could it be the other way around? The study offered hard evidence that we tend to get happiness wrong. Individuals who frequently experience positive emotions aren't just more sociable, optimistic, and creative. They also accomplish more. These people bring an infectious energy to their environment, proving more likely to enjoy fulfilling relationships, get higher salaries, and truly shine in their professional lives. Those who cultivate positive emotions at work morph into better problem solvers, planners, creative thinkers, and resilient go-getters. They are less stressed, attract higher evaluations from their superiors, and show a higher degree of loyalty to their organizations. Success doesn't lead to feeling good. Feeling good leads to success. Put simply, success doesn't lead to feeling good. Feeling good leads to success. How to use this book. Back in that first harrowing year as a doctor, most of these discoveries were still years ahead of me. I was working endless shifts and trying to shoehorn my productivity research into the fleeting breaks between visiting patients. But even the basic insights I uncovered were enough to cause a dramatic change in my relationship with work. When I started to let go of my obsessions with discipline and focus instead on making work feel good, my horrific shifts started to get easier. Soon my mood started to improve too. I remember one appointment with an elderly patient a few months after I discovered feel-good productivity. You know, doctor, she said, you're the first one in here who smiled all week. These new perspectives wouldn't just alter my approach to being a doctor. They would alter the direction of my life altogether. For the first time in years, I began to see the opportunities beyond the confines of work, my friendships, my family, and the other passions that I'd sidelined. And I soon found myself wanting to share my discovery. For a few years, I'd been running a YouTube channel on which I posted study tips and technology reviews. Now, I started sharing practical insights I'd learned from psychology and neuroscience, using myself as the guinea pig, experimenting with everything I learned and the strategies I thought might work. As my radical notion that success doesn't have to be tied to suffering started to gain traction, I started to get more and more emails from my viewers. High school students aced their exams, business owners doubled their income, parents managed to balance work and family life better, all by applying the strategies I was sharing. Even seasoned professionals, worn out from the grind of corporate life, were discovering fresh energy, motivation, and new direction. And so was I. The more I read, the more my philosophy developed. Eventually, by following the same principles and strategies I was learning about, I realized that I wanted to take a break from medicine to pursue something new. That's when I knew I had to write this book. What's contained in these pages isn't just another productivity system to help you get more done at any cost. It's about doing more of what matters to you. It'll help you learn more about yourself, what you love and what really motivates you. My method has 3 parts, each of which tackles a different aspect of feel-good productivity. Part 1 explains how to use the science of feel-good productivity to energize yourself. It introduces the 3 energizers that underpin positive emotions, play, power, and people, and explains how to integrate them into your daily life. Next, Part 2 examines how feel-good productivity can help us overcome procrastination. You'll learn about the 3 blockers that make us feel worse: uncertainty, fear, and inertia, and how to overcome them. When you remove these blockers, you won't just overcome procrastination, you'll feel better too. Finally, in Part 3, we'll explore how feel-good productivity can sustain us in the long term. We'll delve into the 3 different types of burnout: overexertion burnout, depletion burnout, and misalignment burnout. And I'll explain how we can harness 3 simple sustainers: conserve, recharge, and align to make us feel better not just for days and weeks, but for months and years. Every chapter contains its fair share of practical tips. But my goal in this book isn't to offer you some sprawling to-do list. It's to offer you a philosophy and new way of thinking about productivity that you can apply to your own life in your own way. My hope is that you leave this book an amateur productivity scientist, finding some methods that work, discarding others, and working savvily to see what helps you feel good and achieve more. That's why every chapter contains not only 3 simple, science-backed ideas you can use to rethink productivity, but also 6 experiments that you can implement in your own life. If an experiment works for you, great. If it doesn't, then that too is a helpful insight. By the end of the book, though, you should have a toolkit for applying feel-good productivity to your own work, relationships, and life. I only hope it works as well for you as it is for me. Because if there's one thing I've learned by immersing myself in the science of feel-good productivity, it's that it applies in every sphere. It turns daunting tasks into engaging challenges. It leads to deeper connections with peers. It drives meaningful interactions in what you do every day. By understanding and applying what makes you feel good, you won't just transform your work. You'll transform your life. Feel-good productivity is a simple method, but it changes everything. It shows that if you've ever felt underwater, you don't have to settle for staying afloat. You can learn how to swim. Let's dive in. Part 1: Energize. Chapter 1: Play. On paper, everything about Professor Richard Feynman's career looked perfect. 1. Aged just 27, he was already being hailed as one of the greatest physicists of his generation, the man most likely to work out how to harness the potential of nuclear energy. Now, he'd been appointed one of the youngest professors at Cornell University in upstate New York. There was just one problem. He was bored of physics. The issue had started in the mid-1940s. Every time he sat down to think, he just felt tired. It had begun when Feynman's wife, Arline, died of tuberculosis in June 1945, months before the end of World War II in America. After her death, all the music in the young professor's life faded away. The ideas that had so animated him as a doctoral student felt dull and flat. Even though he was good at teaching, it felt like a bore and a chore. I had simply burned myself out, he later recalled. I'd go over to the library a lot and read through the Arabian Nights, he wrote. But when it came time to do some research, I couldn't get to work. I was not interested. It was pretty easy doing nothing, he found. He still liked teaching undergraduates, sitting in the library reading and wandering around campus. He just didn't like working. Easy enough. By the late 1940s, Feynman had reconciled himself to a new identity, a physics professor who didn't do any physics. Until, one day, everything changed. A few years after his problem started, Feynman was sitting in a university cafeteria, alone, opposite a group of students. One of them was repeatedly throwing a plate up in the air. Feynman noticed something odd. While the plate was airborne, it wobbled. But the Cornell logo inscribed on the plate seemed to wobble faster than the plate itself. Curious, Feynman thought, but not exactly Nobel Prize worthy. He was the man who had helped crack the code of nuclear fission. He wasn't supposed to be theorizing the characteristics of airborne crockery. But this moment of curiosity sparked a minor epiphany. He began to reflect on what had drawn him to his subject in the first place. I used to enjoy doing physics, he later recollected. Why did I enjoy it? I used to play with it. I used to do whatever I felt like doing. It didn't have to do with whether it was important for the development of nuclear physics, but whether it was interesting and amusing for me to play with. After leaving the cafeteria, Feynman found himself reminiscing about how he'd seen the world as a teenager. When he was in high school, the things that had most fascinated him about the world had seemed mundane to others. He would see water growing narrower the further it got from the tap and wondered if he could figure out what determined that curve. I didn't have to do it. It wasn't important for the future of science. Somebody else had already done it, he said. That didn't make any difference. I'd invent things and play with things for my own entertainment. What if returning to that worldview held the key to finding joy in physics again? He wondered. Approaching physics not as a job, but as a game to be played for fun? I got this new attitude, he decided. Just like I read the Arabian Nights for pleasure and go into play with physics whenever I want to without worrying about any importance whatsoever, it started with that wobbling plate. In the weeks that followed, Feynman spent weeks trying to model the equations that explained how the plate moved through the air. His colleagues, bemused, asked him why. There's no importance whatsoever, Feynman told them blithely. I'm just doing it for the fun of it, but the more Feynman got into the wobbling plates, the more fascinating they became. Soon, he was pondering whether the wobbling of a rotating plate was anything like the wobbling of electrons in an atom. Or maybe the workings of quantum electrodynamics. Before I knew it, it was a very short time I was working, really with the same old problem I loved so much, except this time, the work of physics didn't burn him out. Professor Feynman's interest in plate spinning would eventually win him the Nobel Prize in Physics. His model for all that wobbling helped make sense of quantum electrodynamics, a theory that describes how light and tiny particles interact at the quantum level. To visualize them, he said, it's helpful to imagine rapidly spinning plates. Feynman was not alone. To my knowledge, at least 6 Nobel Prize winners attribute their success to play. James Watson and Francis Crick, who discovered the structure of DNA in the 1950s, described the generative process they used to come up with the structures, constructing a set of molecular models and beginning to play. Alexander Fleming, the scientist who discovered the antibiotic penicillin, too, once described his job as playing with microbes. Donna Strickland, the 2018 Nobel laureate in physics, described her career as getting to play with high-intensity lasers. Konstantin Novosel, who shared the 2010 Nobel Prize in Physics free for helping discover graphene, put it most simply, if you try to win the Nobel, you won't, he reflected. The way we were working really was quite playful. This approach is supported by a growing body of research. Psychologists increasingly believe that play holds the key to true productivity, partly because it provides a sense of psychological relief. As one recent study put it forward, the psychological function of play is to restore the physically and mentally fatigued individual through participation in activity which is pleasurable and relaxing. Life is stressful. Play makes it fun. Play it is our first energizer. Life is stressful. Play makes it fun. If we can integrate the spirit of play into our lives, we'll feel better and do more too. Create an adventure bringing play into our lives is easier said than done, you might say. In adulthood, many of us are all too aware that play doesn't come easy. When we're kids, our days are filled with a sense of adventure. We explore every inch of the garden, we race through shopping malls, we climb trees, and we swing from branches. We're not striving for goals or trying to boost our resume. We're following our curiosity and enjoying activities without worrying about results. But as we get older, the spirit of adventure gets slowly squeezed out of us. Unless you had particularly forward-thinking parents, you were probably taught that the first major step towards becoming a grown-up is to stop playing and start taking life seriously. Life goes from being filled with adventure to a mundane, predictable existence. This is a mistake. Because adventure, it turns out, is the first major ingredient of play and perhaps of happiness. In one 2020 experiment from New York University and the University of Miami, 5 scientists attempted to quantify the effects of approaching the world with a sense of adventure. They enlisted over 130 participants and got their consent to track their location using the GPS in their phones. Over the next several months, the researchers sent the participants text messages asking them about their emotions, how happy, excited, or relaxed did they feel. The results were eye-opening. As the GPS data and responses to the text messages rolled in, it became clear that those who had more adventurous experiences, those who took themselves off to a wider and more random assortment of places, whether taking a new route to work or trying a different coffee shop rather than sticking to their regular one, felt happier, more excited, and more relaxed. Their conclusion: an adventurous life holds the key to unlocking positive emotions. So, the first way to harness the potential of play is to integrate adventure into our lives. But how? Well, with the right tools, we can still find the excitement we once got from racing through those malls and swinging from those branches. The first step: choosing your character. Experiment 1. Choose your character confession. I used to be addicted to World of Warcraft. WoW is an online role-playing game that is famously aimed at total nerds. You start by choosing your character. It could be a warlock, a warrior, a paladin, or plenty more, and explore the fantasy world of Azeroth. You team up with other players to fly around the world, slaying demons, upgrading your weapons, and having the time of your life. It's also famous for being highly addictive. In the 3 years after I discovered the game when I was 14, I clocked up 184 days of playtime on it. That's 4,416 hours. 4 hours a day, or 25% of my waking hours. It was a lot. Why did I find World of Warcraft so addictive? As a 14-year-old, there's nothing more exciting than killing monsters and going on quests. Actually, as an adult, that still sounds pretty appealing. But if this simple fact explains why the first few hours of gameplay are fun, it probably doesn't explain the next several thousand. To be honest, after a while, the mechanics of the game stop being that entertaining. There are only so many times you can enjoy being sent on a mission to rescue the local village's cat. I increasingly suspect it wasn't the basic mechanics of WoW that made it so pleasurable, it was the escapism. WoW offers a vivid, alternative world, one where you can slay an army of zombies with a magic spell or tame a dragon and fly around on its back. And more importantly, it's a world that you enter in character. In WoW, I've never been Ollie Abdul, the slightly nerdy skull kid with zero sporting ability and confidence issues. I've always been Sephiroth, a tall, handsome blood elf warlock with billowing purple robes and an army of demons at my command. Play allows us to take on different roles or personas, whether we're becoming a character in WoW or acting out an imaginary scene with friends in the playground. These characters allow us to express different aspects of ourselves and transform our experiences into something more enjoyable. When you take on a different persona, you start to find adventure. This is not as out there as it sounds. Choosing your character doesn't mean reinventing your personality overnight nor pretending to be a goblin in front of your colleagues. Rather, it means identifying the type of play that most resonates with who you are so you can choose a type of player to embody. Dr. Stuart Byrne has spent most of his career studying the psychology of play. A clinical psychologist, he began researching the benefits of play after witnessing its transformative effects on patients. Eventually, he would establish the National Institute for Play and became a clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of California, San Diego. During this time, he spoke to over 5,000 people from all walks of life, ranging from artists to truck drivers to Nobel laureates, about what play meant to them. In the course of these interviews, he discovered that most of us are prone to just one or two particular types of character play. By finding the ones that resonate with us the most, we can start to take on a play personality that frees up our sense of adventure. 7. These are the 8 play personalities that Dr. Brown distilled through his research. 1. The collector loves to gather and organize, enjoying activities like searching for rare plants or rummaging around in archives or garage sales. 2. The competitor enjoys games and sports and takes pleasure in trying their best and winning. 3. The explorer likes to wander, discovering new places and things they've never seen through hiking, road tripping and other adventures. 4. The creator finds joy in making things and can spend hours every day drawing, painting, making music, gardening and more. 5. The storyteller has an active imagination and uses their imagination to entertain others. They're drawn to activities like writing, dance, theater and role-playing games. 6. The joker endeavors to make people laugh and may play by performing stand-up, doing improv, or just pulling a lot of pranks to make you smile. 7. The director likes to plan, organize, and lead others, and can fit into many different roles and activities, from directing stage performances to running a company to working in political or social advocacy. 8. The Kansi finds play in physical activities like acrobatics, gymnastics, and free running. He allows the first step to approaching your work and your life with a sense of playful adventure. Reflect on which of these characters you identify with most, and try to approach your work as if you are the character. If you're the storyteller, that might entail seeking out ways to turn a boring task or writing a dry, logistical email into one that draws on your sense of playfulness, finding a way to turn it into a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and maybe an unexpected twist. Or if you're the creator, it might mean transforming mundane tasks filling in the dull spreadsheet into opportunities for self-expression, turning it into a visually appealing and easy to understand infographic. Identifying and exploring our play personalities helps us reclaim some of the adventure that defined our childhood, a time when feeling good was the norm, not the exception. It's a spirit that still lies within us. As Stuart Brand says, remembering what play is all about and making it part of our daily lives are probably the most important factors in being a fulfilled human being. Experiment 2. Embrace your curiosity. What does the term dinosaur actually mean? What Beatles song stayed in the US singles chart for the longest? Who was the president of the United States when Uncle Sam first cut his beard? These are not just questions from a particularly fiendish pub quiz. They are 3 of the 19 prompts used by researchers at the University of California Davis Center for Neuroscience in a pioneering experiment. After asking a group of 24 volunteers these questions, they asked each of them to rate how much they cared about the answers to each question, from low curiosity to high curiosity. And then they let the questions simmer in the minds of the participants for a while. The answers, by the way, are Terrible Lizard, Hey Jude, and Abraham Lincoln. The researchers were trying to investigate what effect curiosity had on people's minds. For one thing, the researchers had a hunch that when people were curious about something, they remembered the details better. They were right. The study showed that people were a whopping 30% more likely to recall a fact they found interesting, rather than a fact they found boring. But what was perhaps more surprising was what was going on in people's brains at the point that they recalled these facts. When they were given a brain scan, their neurological activity was quite different. When they were asked a question they were curious about, they seemed to receive a hit of dopamine. Dopamine is one of our feel-good hormones, and it also activates the part of the brain responsible for learning and forming memories. So for the study participants, engaging with their curiosity made them feel good, and they in turn became better at retaining information. Harnessing your curiosity is a second method for building adventure into your life. Curiosity doesn't simply make our lives more enjoyable. It also allows us to focus longer. After painstakingly researching the biographies of some of history's most pioneering minds, from Leonardo da Vinci to Steve Jobs, the writer Walter Isaacson summarized his findings thus: 9. Being curious about everything not only makes you more creative, it enriches your life. Curiosity doesn't simply make our lives more enjoyable. It also allows us to focus longer. How then do we integrate a sense of curiosity into our lives? One method is to seek out what I call side quests. In video games like Zelda, The Witcher, and Elden Ring, there are dozens of side quests waiting to be pursued. These side quests don't affect the main story of the game, but are driven by the curiosity of the player. What happens if I enter this cave, or try to get to the highest point in this area, or swim to the bottom of this lake? Many of the game's best secrets may be hidden in caves, forests, and villages that a player following the basic storyline wouldn't otherwise come across. I often think of my life as containing a series of side quests. Every day, as I sit down to work, I look at my calendar and to-do list, and I ask myself, what's today's side quest going to be? This question helps me shift my mindset from the obvious tasks that lie ahead to the potential alternative avenues they might take me down. It might prompt me to leave my office and spend a few hours working in a local coffee shop. Or it might encourage me to explore new software I could use to solve the problem I'm working on. By adding a side quest to your day, you create space for curiosity, exploration, and playfulness, and could discover something amazing and totally unexpected along the way. Finally, FUN, it was a starlit evening in the late 1990s at the small university in Ohio. A young graduate research assistant stood in the lab, holding a rat in his palm. He delicately stroked the rat's white belly with a dry paintbrush, hoping that something interesting would happen. At first, nothing. But then, suddenly, the rat cried out. Except not in distress. If anything, the rat seemed to be laughing. These scientists weren't tickling rats for the fun of it. In fact, they were investigating the biological effects of play on the human brain, what lead scientist Jock Panksepp called the biology of joy. 10. At the time, the prevailing belief in the scientific community was that only humans experienced emotions. It was thought that emotions stem from the highly complex part of the brain that is unique to us, the cerebral cortex. But Panksepp's discovery that rodents could laugh suggested an alternative, that emotions must come from much more primitive areas of the brain, like the amygdala and hypothalamus. Joy, Panksepp showed, is a deeply primal experience. One of Panksepp's key findings was that rats love to play. He spent much of his experiment recording the sounds made by rats when they were playing. The noises were joyful. He later said it sounded like a playground. The reason: play releases dopamine. It made the rats feel good. We can learn a thing or two from those rodents. Panksepp's rats showed that if we want to find joy in what we're doing, it won't be solely down to the higher and most complicated parts of the brain, those associated with the cerebral cortex. It's also down to the more ancient, basic parts of our neurology, the same feel-good hormones activated in those rats, which you can release little dopamine hits that keep us happy and engaged. But how? The answer can be found by studying what specifically elicits dopamine. As one article published by Harvard Medical School puts it, the hormone is activated by sex, shopping, and smelling, cookies baking in the oven 11, in other words, by the activities we find fun. So if we want to harness the revolutionary effects of play, our second step is to seek out fun everywhere we go. And that starts by paying a visit to a Disneyfied version of Edwardian London. Experiment 3, the magic post-it note. During a particularly exhausting phase working as a junior doctor, my housemate Molly and I decided to revisit a childhood favourite, Mary Poppins. We hoped that immersing ourselves in a world of animated birds, extremely bad Cockney accents, and musical hits about suffragism would provide some relief, even if only for a couple of hours. At the time, I was struggling to find motivation to study for my postgraduate medical exams. When combined with my hospital work, the looming deadlines and complex material felt overwhelming. The idea of sitting down to read textbooks at the end of my shift felt nightmarish. But as I rewatched Mary Poppins, something unexpected happened. The movie wasn't just a frivolous tale of a quirky nanny with magical powers. It held a profound truth. One of the film's most famous songs is A Spoonful of Sugar, which Mary sings to the children when they're complaining about chores. I didn't remember many of the lyrics from my childhood, other than the chorus, "A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down," in the most delightful way. Watching this familiar yet forgotten scene 20-something years later, I heard how the song begins. In every job that must be done, there is an element of fun. You find the fun and snap. The job's a game. The rest of the song describes various ways in which larks, robins, and honeybees make their tedious tasks more enjoyable by singing while they work. Robins apparently sing their merry tune in order to move the job along, an analysis I was subsequently sad to learn is not ornithologically accurate. I decided to apply this idea to my own life. In a late-night burst of inspiration, I grabbed a Sharpie and a post-it note and wrote 9 simple words. What would this look like if it were fun? I stuck the note to my computer monitor and went to sleep. By the time I spotted the note on my monitor the following day, I'd forgotten that I'd put it there. I just got back from work and was making a start on relearning some biochemistry pathways for my medical exam. I sat down with my usual grin and bared expression. But when I saw the post-it, it got me thinking. What would this look like if it were fun? The first answer came to me immediately. If this were fun, there would be music. I realized that memorizing tedious biochemistry pathways magically became a lot more interesting with the Lord of the Rings soundtrack playing through my headphones. Suddenly, music became one of the most important ways for me to bring more playfulness into my work. I also began to apply this method at work. At the time, I was on my geriatric medicine placement, where the doctor's office was a small, scantily decorated room in the corner of the ward. On one particularly grueling afternoon, when I was sitting in the office with an enormous list of tasks before me, I decided to apply the musical fun method. I didn't have any speakers with me, so I grabbed a bowl from the kitchen and put my phone in there to use as a makeshift speaker. I opened up Spotify and spent the rest of the day doing my tasks with the Pirates of the Caribbean soundtrack playing at a low volume. The effects were transformative, it just felt better. What would this look like if it were fun has now become a guiding question in my life. And it's surprisingly easy to draw upon. Think of a task that you don't want to do right now and ask what would it look like if it were fun. Could you do it in a different way? Could you add music, or a sense of humor, or get creative? What if you set out to do the task with friends, or promised yourself a treat at the end of the process? Is there a way to make this training process a little more enjoyable? Experiment 4. Enjoy the process, not the outcome. There is another way to find fun in everything you're doing, and it doesn't even involve rewatching children's films from the mid-20th century. In fact, it's best demonstrated by a 5'7" Spanish teenager with bleached blonde hair. In August 2021, Alberto Ginés Lopez stepped onto the podium as the inaugural gold medal winner in sport climbing at the Summer Olympics in Tokyo. Over the preceding weeks, the world had watched transfixed as he completed a series of astonishing physical feats on the multicolored walls of Tokyo's Aomi Urban Sports Park. Most impressive of all was the speed climbing, where you clamber up a wall as fast as possible, Spydo style. Lopez reached the top of the wall in a dazzling 6.42 seconds. But as the crowds watched Lopez and his fellow climbers scrabble up the walls at dizzying speeds, they also noticed that this was quite an unusual sport. It wasn't just that the competitors tended to look rather more bohemian than your regular track and field athletes, with locks of colourfully dyed hair and brightly coloured harnesses. They also seemed to be more relaxed. Rather than avoiding eye contact and watching tensely as their competitors took to the walls, many of the climbers seemed to be chatting jovially at the bottom and even sharing tips. When they did take to the walls, their faces displayed none of the agonized intensity that most sprinters or even footballers tend to exhibit. In fact, they seemed to be positively enjoying themselves. Those climbers hint at our second way to find the fun, by emphasizing the joy that comes not from the outcome, but the process itself. According to the Hungarian-American psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, pronounced Csikszentmihalyi, the biggest difference between climbing and, say, football is that most climbers are completely immersed in the process, climbing the wall rather than the end result, winning the game. The pioneer of the study of flowless state, in which we're so immersed in a task that the rest of the world seems to melt away, Csikszentmihalyi first developed his theories while watching climbers in the Alps as a teenager. Csikszentmihalyi argued that if we can learn to focus on the process rather than the outcome, we're substantially more likely to enjoy a task. But how? It might be easy enough for rock climbing, which is inherently fun to some anyway. But what if you find yourself in altogether more mundane, or even unpleasant, situations? Arguably, this is where the power of focusing on the process becomes even more powerful. Because with a little creative thinking, you can find joy in any process, however mundane it might seem. Take the story of Matthew Dix, today a world champion storyteller and best-selling novelist. Years before he published his first book, Dix worked in McDonald's. And he hated it. The days felt endless, Matt once told me. It was the same routine over and over again, taking orders, flipping burgers, and handing out fries. There was no excitement, no spark, no challenge, and so Dix decided to see if there was any joy to be had, not in the job's outcome, his infuriatingly meager paycheck, but in the process instead. He landed on a classic tactic, upselling. Some days I'd decide it was BBQ sauce day, he recalls. So for the rest of the day, I'd add a mini sales pitch to each order I took. The customer would order a Big Mac and fries, and I'd ask them if they'd like any sauce with that. If they said no, I'd smile and say, well, I'd really recommend the BBQ sauce, there's nothing that beats that. Usually at this point they were a little taken aback, and they'd say, okay then, I'll take the sauce. If they still didn't bite, I'd say, that's okay, but you're really missing out. My last customer was reluctant, but when she tried the sauce she knew she made the right decision. Dix says that the effects of these little changes in his routine were unexpectedly significant. They were the kind of mini-tasks that might, in his words, just make the customer's day a little better, and definitely made me feel more energized on days that felt like they were dragging. And they worked. Dix found himself looking forward to his shifts, eager to see how many people he could convince to try the BBQ sauce. The process was not inherently enjoyable, but Dix had created a way to enjoy it. And in doing so, he had found the fun in an uninspiring situation. Lower the stakes if adventure and fun promote our ability to play, there is a related, similarly potent factor that reduces that ability stress. To understand how, let's turn once again to this chapter's most unfortunate experimental subjects, white rats. Alas, these rats were in for a less enjoyable afternoon than their brush-tickled counterparts that we met earlier. On this occasion, scientists from Columbia University took a group of rats at various different stages of developmental and placed a mesh on top of each one so that it was restrained and couldn't move freely. Then they left them there for 30 minutes. Unsurprisingly, this proved pretty stressful. Before being restrained by the mesh, the rats were messing around with each other, play fighting and touching each other's nates. But after the mesh was released, the researchers found that the rat play behavior completely disappeared. Instead, the rats stayed huddled in groups, not playing at all. Thankfully, the play behavior returned to baseline levels an hour after this stressful restraining experience. Studies on humans, though blessedly less nasty than the ones on animals, have found similar results. Children are more likely to play when they are in a comfortable, 13 non-threatening environment. And studies of adults in the workplace have found that the feeling of relaxation promotes playful behaviors, as well as promoting creativity and well-being. These studies, and countless others, prove something that most of us instinctively know to be true. When we're stressed, we're less likely to be playful. And our creativity, productivity, and well-being tend to suffer too. All this hints at our final ingredient of play. For play to flourish, we don't just need to seek out adventure and find fun. We also need to try and create an environment that's low stakes and that fosters relaxation. And we can start to do that by reappraising how we think about failure. Experiment 5, Reframe Your Failure. In 2016, a NASA-trained engineer 15 named Mark Rober recruited 50,000 people to try out a new computer challenge. He wanted to prove that anyone could learn how to code, he told them. And so he set them off on a series of relatively easy coding challenges. In fact, the experiment was more complicated than Rober let on. The key difference came when the participants made an error. Half of them grew. One received an error message when they wrote code that failed to execute properly. You have failed, please try again. The other half grew. 2 got a slightly different message. You have failed. You've lost 5 points. You now have 195 points. Please try again. Everything else about the 2 groups was identical. This small distinction made an astonishing difference. Group 1, on average, made 12 attempts to solve the coding puzzle and had a success rate of 68%. Group 2, on average, made just 5 attempts to solve the puzzle, with a success rate of 52%. The first time I heard about this experiment, I was astonished. Purely because there was an arbitrary, meaningless penalty of 5 points for failure at the puzzle, the 25,000 people in Group 2 from all around the world made, on average, less than half the number of attempts at the puzzle than those in Group 1. As you might have guessed, Rober's interest wasn't really in teaching people to code. He was most interested in how we think about failure. His aim was to show that we're hugely disproportionately impacted by negative consequences, even arbitrary ones. And these consequences make us afraid of failure even when we needn't be. But what if there was a different way to look at failures? One that allows us to see them as inevitable, and maybe even fun. This is what Robert was trying to work at. Having worked at NASA for 9 years, then at Apple as a project designer, before switching his focus to becoming a science educator on YouTube, Robert's experiment proved what he'd already noticed in the world of work, that success isn't down to how often you fail. It's about how you frame your failures. In a talk where he shared the findings of this experiment, Robert asks if we could just frame our learning process so that we weren't so concerned with failure. How much more could we learn? How much more could we succeed? Robert knew that getting a computer program to work invariably requires a process of trying, failing, and trying again. These supposed failures are not really failures, they're data points that we need to figure out how to succeed. In the course of writing this book, I've often felt moved by Robert's insight. Because his study offers a useful insight into how to reduce stress and, in turn, how to create an environment where you can play. Imagine what your life would look like if you received 5 proverbial points for failing, rather than losing 5 like in the experiment. Imagine what would happen if people cheered you on for a little stumble rather than humiliated you. Imagine how you'd approach things if you treated them as experiments, where failure would be just as valuable as success. Might you now see the game of life slightly differently? Suddenly, the stakes are lower. And suddenly, you can afford to play around a little. If your goal is to find a fulfilling career and your hypothesis is that a corporate role might be fulfilling, then your data collection process might be to sample careers through internships and job placements. With an experimental mindset, an internship that you end up hating wouldn't be a failure or a waste of time, it'd just be another data point to help you realize that that's not what you want. If your goal is to build a successful business, then your data collection process might involve testing different business ideas, products, or services. With an experimental mindset, a product launch that doesn't meet expectations wouldn't be a failure or a disaster, it'd just be another data point to help you refine your strategy and better understand your target market. No failure is ever just a failure. It's an invitation to try something new. And if your goal is to develop meaningful relationships, then your data collection process might involve going on dates, attending social events, and engaging with new people. With an experimental mindset, a date that doesn't lead to a second one or a friendship that doesn't blossom wouldn't be a failure, to just be another data point to help you understand your compatibility. No failure is ever just a failure. It's an invitation to try something new. Experiment 6. Don't be serious. Be sincere. Once we've reframed our failures as data points, it becomes easier to eliminate the stresses that stop us approaching life with a sense of play. But there's a final method that's just as powerful, one that I learned from the world's unlikeliest Buddhist guru. Born in Chislehurst, Kent, an unremarkable suburban district of southern England, for the first few years of Alan Watts' life he seemed destined to become a bank clerk, or maybe a lawyer. He developed an interest in East Asian religion after experiencing a mystical fever dream as a child. It would change his life. Over the next 50 years, he became a leading authority on Eastern philosophy, publishing multiple best-selling books on what Zen and Taoism can teach us about the universe. When I first stumbled upon Watts' lectures a few months into writing this book, I was immediately struck by the profundity of his way of seeing the world, and how well the perspective fitted into my theories of feel-good productivity. And in particular, a simple phrase for which he would become famous: don't be serious, be sincere. In one famous lecture, The Individual and the World, Watts outlined a key mistake we make in understanding the world. He quotes the early 20th century English writer G.K. Chesterton: in frivolity there is a lightness which can rise, but in seriousness is a gravity that falls, like a stone. This, he said, was true of people who understood Zen. He summarized it thus: there is a difference between being serious and being sincere. What did he mean? Well, consider playing a board game Monopoly, let's say. No one wants to play Monopoly with someone who takes the game too seriously. We've all played those games. The serious person cares a little too much about winning, and they suck the energy out of the room. They're obsessive, quoting from the rulebook regarding whether you're really allowed to collect £200 for passing go via a chance card gets in the way of everyone else's fun. But neither do we want to play a game with someone who's completely uncaring. Those people don't engage with the game, and don't make an active effort to play to the best of their ability. They don't congratulate you when you manage to get out of jail, even though you refuse to pay the £50 exit fee and instead went for the bold, daring strategy of rolling a double. They're no fun either. No, the most fun people to play games with are people who play sincerely. They take the game seriously enough to be fully engaged in the experience, but not so seriously that they become fixated on winning or losing. They are able to laugh and joke around, to make light of their mistakes, and to enjoy the company of their friends without becoming overly attached to winning or the rules. There's a lot to be gained from treating our work and our life with this approach too. I find that in moments when I feel stressed, anxious, or drained by my work, it's easy to forget to be sincere and to flip towards being too serious instead. In these moments, the stakes feel overwhelming. But there's a way to lower them. The trick is simple. When you feel like your work is draining or overwhelming, try asking yourself, how can I approach this with a little less seriousness and a little more sincerity? If you were approaching a difficult project at work sincerely rather than seriously, you might focus on the process of completing each task, rather than becoming fixated on the end result. You might also seek out the input and collaboration of others, rather than trying to tackle the project on your own. By doing these things, you may find that it's easier to approach it in the spirit of play, and that you're better able to stay focused and motivated throughout. If you were approaching a job interview sincerely rather than seriously, then instead of becoming overly nervous and stressed about the outcome, you might focus on being present and engaged. You might also try to connect with the interviewer on a more personal level, rather than simply trying to impress them with your credentials. By doing so, you might be more likely to approach the interview with lightness and ease, and to come away from the interview feeling more confident and satisfied with your performance. And if you were approaching writing a book sincerely rather than seriously, you might decide to throw a detailed homage to World of Warcraft into the very first chapter, illustrating to your future readers that even when creating something as significant as your first book, you can treat the process with levity. By doing so, you'd hopefully help the text create a sense of fun, even while holding forth on the science of productivity. You might end up able to stress less and play more. I'm not the only doctor to think so. In the medical drama Grey's Anatomy, Dr. Derek Shepherd, the handsome neurosurgeon played by Patrick Dempsey, has a ritual at the start of each of his operations. He greets the team, puts some energizing music on in the background, and says, "It's a beautiful day to save lives. Let's have some fun. Seriousness is overrated." If you want to achieve more without ruining your life, the first step is to approach your work with a sense of play. There are 3 ways you can incorporate the spirit of play into your life. First, approach things with a sense of adventure. When you step into the right play personality, every day abounds with opportunities to see life as a game, filled with surprises and side quests. Second, find the fun. Remember Mary Poppins, there's an element of fun in every task, even if it isn't always obvious. Try asking yourself what this would look like if it were fun, and then build your projects around the answer. Third, lower the stakes. Failures are only failures when you think they are, and not every problem need be approached with such a straight face. So what would it mean to approach your work with less seriousness and more sincerity? Chapter 2: Power. In September 2000, Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph attempted to sell their fledgling company, One Netflix, to the CEO of Blockbuster Video. It went extremely badly. The pair had bet on what they thought was a revolutionary model for video rentals. Customers could log into a website, order DVD, and receive and return them through the post. But while they poured everything they had into the company, they were hemorrhaging cash. They had over 100 employees, but only 3,000 paying customers. And they were on track to lose $57 million before the year was through. They wanted out. So after months of calling and emailing, they finally secured a meeting with Blockbuster's boss, John Antioco, at the company's headquarters in Dallas. It was a big opportunity. A $6 billion publicly traded company with over 9,000 stores worldwide, Blockbuster dominated the American video market. But the meeting went dramatically off the rails. At first, Antioco and his general counsel, Ed Stead, were friendly and polite. They listened carefully as Hastings and Randolph explained why Blockbuster should buy Netflix, a new type of video rental for an online world. But then, Antioco asked the big question, how much? $50 million. There was a moment's silence. And then Antioco burst out laughing. Fast forward 10 years and Blockbuster Video had filed for bankruptcy. Unable to keep up with the pace of the transition to online video, the company had gradually closed the majority of its stores before finally going bust. Fast forward another 10 years and Netflix, by then an online streaming service, was valued at a market cap of $300 billion and universally hailed as one of the world's most innovative companies. The transformation of Netflix from a company that was literally laughed out of the room by Blockbuster's CEO to one of the most valuable businesses on earth seemed unlikely. How did they do it? Well, there are a few answers. Some credit the vision of Hastings and his team. Others their fortuitous timing in launching just as the internet took off. But the most common explanation for Netflix's success is more simple: culture. As Netflix was first getting off the ground, Reed Hastings hired Patty McCord as Netflix's chief talent officer. McCord had previously worked in human resources at a few other tech companies, and she wasn't happy with the traditional approach to people management. She wanted to create a culture where employees felt able to take control of their own work. Hastings worked with McCord to create a set of values that would guide the company's culture, including a focus on freedom and responsibility. This subtle shift was transformative. McCord spearheaded a radical shift in the way Netflix approached its staff. She got rid of traditional policies like vacation days, set work hours, and performance reviews, and gave more autonomy to employees. As long as employees met their goals, they could do what they liked. This approach was met with some skepticism at first. But as the company grew and flourished, it became clear it was working. Netflix's culture not only helped the company attract and retain top talent, but also led to better ideas. Rather than relying on traditional methods of market research and focus groups, Netflix let their creative teams take the lead in developing and producing new shows and movies. The result was some of the most remarkable TV and film of our time. McCord summarized her focus on freedom and responsibility in a simple word: power. It's a tricky term, and one that can have negative connotations, conjuring up images of totalitarian dictators, horrible bosses, and shadowy hallways where people do whatever they can to grab and hold onto control over others. Some might see the word power and think, that's not me. If you're one of those people, I want you to start thinking differently about power. When McCord used the word, she meant a sense of personal empowerment, the sense that your job is in your control, your life is in your hands, and the decisions about your future are yours alone. This power isn't something that we exert on others, it's something we feel, the energy that makes us want to shout from the rooftops, I can do it. Power is our second energizer, a crucial ingredient in feeling good and being productive. And best of all, it's not something you seize from others, it's something you create for yourself. Boost your confidence. Our journey into the science of power begins in a lab filled with several dozen exercise-averse volunteers. This group of 28 female students had been brought together precisely because they did not exercise particularly often, a fact that some scientists at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign thought presented a research opportunity. In this study, published in the International Journal of Behavioral Medicine, they set out to test a simple hypothesis that our confidence in our athletic abilities has a huge impact on what those abilities actually are. At the beginning of the experiment, all 28 students were asked to cycle on a stationary bike for a fixed amount of time while a device measured their heart rate and VO2 max, the amount of oxygen your body can absorb and use during exercise. Once the exercise session was over, the researchers split the students into two groups based on their performance on the exercise bike. After a brief cool-down period, they told students in group at the high-confidence group that, relative to other women of their age and experience, they were among the fittest. The students in Group B, the low-confidence group, meanwhile, were told that they were among the least fit. And then both groups of women were left to stew for a few days. The truth was, the whole thing was a ruse. The high-confidence group wasn't actually better at exercise, and the low-confidence group wasn't actually worse. In fact, they'd been randomly allocated into the two groups, and their performance on the exercise test had nothing to do with the message that was delivered. What the scientists were really interested in was the next stage. 3 days later, the participants were asked to come back to the lab to exercise for about 30 minutes and asked to rate how much they enjoyed this new session. The results were striking. The researchers found that those in the high-confidence group who had been told how very fit they were enjoyed the exercise session a lot more than the low-confidence group who had been told they were unhealthy. This was even truer for exercise that was more intensive and challenging. When the participants were asked to cycle harder and for longer, the difference between the two groups became even more stark. When the going got tough, those who believed they could do it regardless of their ability were the ones who actually could. And, crucially, the students who were primed to be more confident ended up enjoying the exercise a lot more too. The study was exploring a simple question. How does our level of self-confidence affect our performance? The answer to this question, along with those of many such studies before and since, is simple: a great deal. Feeling confident about our ability to complete a task makes us feel good when we're doing it, and helps us do it better. The origins of this insight can be traced back to the Canadian-American psychologist Albert Bandura. Born in the tiny town of Monday, Alberta in 1925, by the time of his death in 2021, Bandura was one of the most influential psychologists in history. That influence was, in large part, down to an idea that he introduced in 1977 and one that would make him famous: self-efficacy. Drawing on his research over the previous decade, Bandura argued that it's not just our abilities that are important in human performance and well-being, it's how we feel about our abilities. Self-efficacy was the term he coined to describe such feelings, referring to how much belief we have that we are able to achieve our objectives. Believing you can is the first step to making sure you actually can. To oversimplify just a little, self-efficacy is psychology jargon for confidence. And taking steps to boost it is the primary way we can build our sense of empowerment. In the half-century since Bandura introduced the concept of self-efficacy, hundreds of researchers have shown that the higher our confidence in our own abilities, the higher our self-efficacy, the greater those abilities become. By 1998, psychologists Alexander Studkovic and Fred Luffens were able to state on the basis of 114 studies involving almost 22,000 study participants that Bandura was right. Believing you can is the first step to making sure you actually can. Experiment 1, the confidence, which the idea of self-efficacy is intriguing, but maybe not that surprising. Of course all levels of self-confidence affect our abilities, you might think. Anyone who's ever seen an egotist charm their way around a room thanks solely to an unwavering faith in their own brilliance can attest to that. But what's more surprising about self-efficacy, perhaps, is quite how malleable it is. Because from the moment Bandura began investigating the science of confidence, he noticed something else striking: that self-efficacy is easy to teach. After decades of research, he concluded that confidence isn't something you're born with, it's something you learn. In the years after he introduced his revolutionary idea, Bandura would go on to identify a few simple tools that can have a transformative impact on self-efficacy. Take the power of verbal persuasion. Bandura was fond of pointing out a simple truth about self-efficacy, that the things you say often become the things you believe. As such, the very act of hearing small positive interventions, like "you can do it" or "nearly there," can have a remarkable effect on our self-confidence levels. Usually, we imagine that the source of these uplifting phrases will be our family, friends, colleagues, or personal trainers. What's more intriguing is that we can also deliver these messages to ourselves. In 2014, scientists at Bangor University 6 published results from a study into the power of self-talk. Each participant was tested on their time to exhaustion, that is, how long they could cycle for before they felt unable to go on. Then, like our previous group of exhausted cyclists, they were left to ruminate for 2 weeks. This time, however, the second stage was different. When they returned to the bikes after a fortnight, they were divided into 2 groups. One got a positive self-talk intervention, where they were shown a series of motivational phrases, like "you're doing well" and "you can push through this," and chose 4 of them to tell themselves while cycling. The other group got no such prompt. Surely such tiny acts of self-motivation couldn't single-handedly transform the participants' performance, the scientists thought. Except it turned out they could. The group that got the specific self-talk intervention ended up significantly reducing their RPE, rate of perceived exertion, or how effortful the cycling felt, at the 50% mark, and noticeably improving their TT, time to exhaustion, when cycling. The other group performed exactly the same as they had previously. This study shows that simply by becoming your own hype team you can dramatically impact your own productivity. In the years since I read it, I've come up with a few specific ways you can do so. My favorite method involves what I call flipping the confidence switch. In other words, challenging yourself to behave as if you're confident in your task, even if you're not. The method is even more simple than it sounds. The next time you're not feeling good enough to take a chance, simply ask yourself, what would it look like if I were really confident at this? What would it look like if I approached this task feeling confident that I could do it? I used to use this trick extensively when I worked as a walk-around magician at balls and parties at university. Yes, I was that cool. My job would be to dress up in a tuxedo, go up to groups of partygoers and offer to show them a few magic tricks. Even though I practiced my tricks ad nauseam just to ask any of my friends, I'd still be absolutely terrified at the idea of approaching a group of strangers, interrupting their conversation and stumbling over my word as I offered to show them my favorite card trick. In those moments of self-doubt, I'd take a deep breath and internally flip the confidence switch. I'd remind myself that I was just playing the part of a confident magician, and even if I didn't feel at all confident internally, I was going to act as if I were both confident and competent. Without fail, the shift in my attitude made a huge difference. I woke up to groups of strangers with a smile and a slight swagger, my lines well rehearsed, and I'd come away from each group feeling relieved that the strategy had worked. I've often surprised myself at quite how impactful this method can be. Just for a moment, it's enough to turn an amateur magician into a professional, a terrible amateur musician into a guitar hero, and a nervous public speaker into the most charismatic orator. Next time you're feeling like a task or project is particularly difficult, ask yourself, what would it look like if I were really confident at this? Just by asking yourself the question, you'll visualize yourself confidently approaching the task at hand. The switch has been flipped. Experiment 2. The social model method. Verbal persuasion wasn't the only method Banjur came up with for boosting self-confidence. He was also interested in the way we get confidence from the people around us. My favorite study showing how this works comes from the Clemson University Outdoor Lab 7. This is not your ordinary science laboratory, mind. Nestled on a wooded peninsula by Lake Hartwell in South Carolina, the lab boasts a series of wooden cabins, hiking trails, and water sports equipment with not a petri dish inside. But the recreational veneer of the lab hides its serious scientific function. Over the years, the laboratory has been the site of many pioneering psychological experiments, like the 2007 study of 38 children, aged 6 to 18, who were invited to use the university's climbing wall. When they first arrived at the lab, the students were told that their objective for the day was to make it to the top of the rock climbing wall, one of the main features of Clemson's outdoor lab. It was a daunting prospect. Most of them had never even seen a climbing wall before. The scientists who were running the study were interested in which students would complete the tasks and what might make them more likely to do so. Unbeknown to the children, they'd been split into two groups before their arrival. Group 1 had been shown a short video of someone climbing up a wall that looked very similar to the one at the location, while Group 2 hadn't been shown any videos at all. In every other way, the groups were identical. Amazingly, just watching that video had a dramatic effect. Even though both groups of climbers were given the same instructions when they first arrived at the wall, the group that watched a model rock climber ascend the wall they were about to tackle ended up doing a lot better. They felt more confident about their rock climbing abilities, enjoyed the activity more, and performed better. Why did the small change make such a big difference? If Albert Bandura were to comment, he'd probably attribute it to something called the vicarious mastery experience. This is when you witness or hear about someone else's performance related to a task that you're going to undertake yourself. You see other people's examples, and it boosts your confidence. Most of us have experienced vicarious mastery, even if we didn't have the words for it. Picture this. You're struggling with a big research project at work. You're the only person working on the task and it feels daunting. After a few days of alarming unproductivity, you start to conclude it's not only hard, it's impossible. As you get more and more convinced that what you're attempting is completely unachievable, you get further and further off target. Now imagine the same task, except this time, before starting the project, you saw someone else present the research project on a similar theme. The content of their presentation is entirely different to yours. But this time, you know that this kind of task isn't impossible, you've just seen someone else pull it off. You become more confident that the task can be mastered. Vicariously. Banjur argued that being surrounded by other people who show persistence and effort in overcoming challenges can increase our own feelings of self-efficacy because they demonstrate to us that these challenges can be overcome. In the words of Banjur, seeing people similar to oneself succeed by sustained effort raises observers' beliefs that they too possess the capabilities to master comparable activities to succeed. Like positive self-talk, we can integrate these vicarious mastery experiences into our own lives. My favorite way is by consuming different forms of content created by my role models. I found that my sense of confidence increases substantially when I read books, listen to podcasts, or watch videos with stories of people succeeding in the areas in which I want to feel more empowered. For example, while working in hospital, I'd often listen to the RCP Medicine podcast produced by the Royal College of Physicians on the way to work. Hearing about how different doctors approach different diagnoses and management would give me a boost of confidence that would carry over into my job. When I was building my first online business, I spent a lot of time listening to the Indie Hackers podcast, which featured interviews with entrepreneurs who'd built incredible one-person online businesses from their bedrooms. They talked about the challenges they'd faced and how they'd overcome them, which boosted my own confidence when it came to dealing with similar challenges. And in my new life as a writer, I find that watching, listening to, and even conducting interviews with successful authors does more to boost my own feelings of I can do this than almost anything else. If they can, you can too. It's a toolkit anyone can draw upon. Find people who are going through the same challenges as you and spend time with them, or find other ways to hear their stories. By immersing yourself in vicarious success, you'll be building a powerful story in your own mind that if they can, you can too. Level up your skills. Anakin Skywalker begins his journey as an 8-year-old on Tatooine who races drones to try and make enough money to feed his family. Over the next 3 installments of Star Wars, he learns to use the Force, trains with the lightsaber, and grows into one of the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy. Katniss Everdeen begins her journey as a 16-year-old from District 12, where she hunts illegally to provide for her mother and younger sister. After she volunteers to compete in the deadly Hunger Games, we see her becoming a skilled archer and strategist, forming unexpected alliances, and leading a rebellion against the oppressive capital. Despite the odds always being against her, she becomes a symbol of hope and resistance to the whole nation, the fabled Mockingjay. And in a personal favourite, Avatar: The Last Airbender, our protagonist Aang starts off as a kid from a small village struggling to control his powers over the element of air. Through the series, he explores the world. We see him eventually growing into the powerful Avatar with mastery over all 4 elements: earth, air, water, and fire. At the end of the series, he even saves the world from destruction in an epic showdown with the Fire Lord Ozai. These 3 narrative arcs, among thousands of others in stories and tales across millennia, illustrate a way we can boost our sense of power. Each main character begins their story as a young, inexperienced apprentice. Over time, we watch, read, or hear as they overcome challenging obstacles and grow as people, each one of their successes contributing to the next, and the next, and the next. Our friend Albert Bandura has a catchy name for the way these learning experiences compoundate in active mastery experiences. Inactive mastery is the flip side of the vicarious mastery we've just encountered. According to Bandura, an inactive mastery experience refers to the process of learning through doing. Learning through doing is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. It's the second key strategy if we're to build our sense of power. Why? Because the more we do something, the greater our sense of control. We learn. We level up our skills. Our confidence grows. And we empower ourselves. Experiment 3. The Shoshin approach. What's most interesting about these learning experiences is that they can be built into your life with relative ease. Even in areas where you feel like you're making no progress whatsoever, you can harness the potential of inactive mastery. I learned my favorite way to do so from the story of Phil Jackson. Most basketball fans will know a little about Jackson already. They might know he was the coach who transformed the culture of the Chicago Bulls in the 1980s. They might know about how, as head coach, he led his team to so many NBA championships in the 1990s that it started to get a little embarrassing. 6th, if you're interested. Or they might know that it was Jackson, more than any other coach, who helped turn Michael Jordan into a legend. What they tend not to know, however, is the unlikely origin of Jackson's sporting philosophy, Zen Buddhism. Zen is a branch of Buddhism that emphasizes the practice of meditation as a means to spiritual enlightenment. Zen encourages individuals to look inward and discover their own path to understanding the nature of reality. It was, according to Jackson, integral to every success he ever had. One Zen concept that came up time and again in Jackson's coaching practices was the Japanese word shoshin, which roughly translates as beginner's mind. Shoshin refers to a state of mind in which we approach every task and situation with the curiosity, openness, and humility of a beginner. It might sound odd that adopting a beginner's mind helps you become more of an expert in that field. Surely a beginner is someone who, by definition, has no idea what they are doing. However, Shoshin can have a remarkable impact precisely because it allows us to see things afresh. Think about the skill you've spent years learning. You probably have a set way of doing it. If you like to draw, you know which part of a portrait you prefer to start first. If you play sport, you probably decided long ago which position on the pitch best suits your talents. Your experiences have made you much more set in your ways than you once were. A beginner, on the other hand, has none of these preconceptions. A beginner is more willing to try things out even if they might fail. A beginner will start with whichever part of somebody's portrait tickles their fancy. And a beginner is happy to start off playing anywhere on the field, even if they might make a fool of themselves. They are more willing to make mistakes, and these mistakes are precisely what's needed to learn. When we try to see the world with a fresh perspective, we can maintain this learning process long after it would usually stop. To the Chicago Bulls, this meant approaching each moment with an open mind, free of bias towards any set path or strategy. And according to Jackson, this was the foundation of his team's success. So how can we integrate this beginner's outlook into our lives? The answer starts with giving yourself some simple reminders. If you're in the world of business, Shoshin might mean embracing innovation and experimentation, reminding yourself that masters become limited by their beliefs in what's been done and how, while beginners seek new approaches to problem solving and explore new markets or opportunities. Or if you work in creative fields like writing or music, Shoshin might mean deliberately maintaining your interest in different techniques and pushing yourself to collaborate with people with different styles. Beginners don't hold strong beliefs about what will work, they just try. By letting go of the idea that we know everything, or somehow should, we actually feel more powerful. In this way, Shoshin can help us approach challenges with a greater sense of curiosity, humility, and resilience and help us to learn. Experiment 4. The protege effect. While studying for my psychology degree, I was pleased to learn that older siblings tend to have, on average, slightly higher IQ than their younger siblings. I'd long wondered why I found my little brother so annoying when we were kids. Now I knew. Scientists have tried to come up with various explanations for this phenomenon over the years. Could it be that parents tend to invest more time and energy into their firstborn children than their siblings? Could it be that firstborn children are more likely to engage with adults, which helps develop their vocabularies? Or could it be that parents are more likely to have higher expectations from the first child than from any subsequent children, which nudges firstborns to try harder in school? The jury's still out, but one interesting explanation stems from a study carried out by researchers at Stanford School of Education in 2009. The researchers brought 62 8th graders into a biology class, where they were randomly assigned to one of two groups. The first group was told to study and learn the material as they normally would, with the goal of performing well on a test at the end of the class. The second group was told that they would be teaching the material to a computer-generated avatar, and that their performance would be evaluated based on how well the digital student learned the material. At the end of the class, both groups took the same test to assess their mastery of the material. Strangely, the researchers found that the students in the second group, who taught the material to a computer-generated student, learned better than the students in the first group who studied for the test alone. In identical circumstances, with identical material, the people who had to teach others about a subject would learn the material better themselves. The researchers named this phenomenon the protege effect 10. In the years since, researchers in the field of human intelligence have suggested that perhaps older siblings on average have higher IQ and perform better in school 11 than their younger counterparts because of this very phenomenon. Older siblings take on the role of teacher or mentor to their siblings. Older siblings like me often help their younger siblings like my brother with homework, answer their questions about the world, and share their own experiences and insights, however dubious. The protege effect hints at another way we can boost the number of learning experiences in our lives. As the philosopher Seneca said, "Qui docet dicit, he who teaches learns." And once you understand the power of the protege effect, it becomes surprisingly easy to take on the role of teacher in almost any role. Say you work in software development, you might offer to mentor a junior developer or intern. By explaining complex coding concepts and best practices to someone else, you'll be forced to think more deeply about them yourself, leading to a deeper understanding and improved skill level. Or say you work in sales. You might offer to train new sales reps or host workshops for your team. By sharing your techniques and strategies with others, you'll be able to refine your own skills and gain new insights into the sales process. And you'll also be helping to develop the skills of your colleagues, which will ultimately benefit the entire team. You don't need to be a guru. You can just be a guide. And if you're concerned that you're not qualified enough to teach someone else, it's worth remembering that the people we learn from best are often the ones who are just a step ahead of us in the journey. So anyone can become a teacher. You don't need to be a guru. You can just be a guide. Take ownership of your work. Starting in the early 1970s, the psychologist Edward Desai became intrigued by a simple question. What motivates people to do hard things? This was a theme that had fascinated him since the very beginning of his career. Just 1 year after completing his PhD at Carnegie Mellon University in 1970, he published an influential paper in which he asked people to solve a puzzle called the Soma Cube, a little like a Rubik's Cube. He found that those who were offered a financial reward for solving the puzzle were, weirdly, less likely to enjoy the task and were more likely to give up solving the puzzle after the reward was removed, compared to those who weren't offered any money at all. The material reward seemed to make people less engaged with the task, not more. This led Desai to conclude that the offer of a material reward can, peculiarly, decrease motivation. When, in 1977, Desai met another young psychologist, Richard Ryan, the pair embarked on a professional relationship that would transform how the world thinks about motivation. Over the next 20 years, Ryan and Desai developed a completely new way to think about why we do hard things. Their contribution culminated in 1981 with their statement of self-determination theory. Until that point, most scientists had thought that motivation was mainly driven by incentives like rewards and punishments. But Desai and Ryan showed otherwise. They encouraged readers to see motivation falling on a spectrum, with extrinsic at one end and intrinsic at the other. Intrinsic motivation comes from the inside, driven by self-fulfillment, curiosity, and a genuine desire to learn. Extrinsic motivation comes from the outside, driven by pay rises, material rewards, and social approval. But these forms of motivation were not equal. According to self-determination theory, intrinsic motivation is substantially more powerful than extrinsic motivation. 12. Lasting motivation comes from within. But that wasn't where Desai and Ryan's theory ended. Because they also showed that intrinsic motivation is something that can be built up. As early as the 1980s, they were demonstrating that intrinsic motivation can be enhanced by a handful of forces, chief among them our sense of autonomy. In Leverson's terms, that's a sense of ownership. And it's our final contributor to the sense of power that energizes us in our work. Desai and Ryan argued that when people feel they have power over their own actions, they are much more likely to be intrinsically motivated to engage in them. That's why the Sum Cube experiment found that monetary rewards reduce people's motivation. They don't feel like they fully own the task, but that they are undertaking it for some external reward. Their sense of control declines, and so does their sense of motivation. This rings true in our own lives. Our need for control is why we hate being micromanaged by our bosses and our parents. Our need for control is why we love to decorate our bedrooms when we're kids or design our homes as adults. And when our control over our lives is taken away, if we end up in prison or shackled to a job we don't enjoy, it can have disastrous consequences for our physical and mental health. The trouble is that taking control isn't always straightforward. Sure, some of us have jobs in which we have plenty of ownership over our day-to-day lives. Successful entrepreneurs have autonomy over the direction of their business. Digital nomads are free to trot around the globe, working from any cafe they come across. Others don't and can't. A hotel receptionist has to stand at the desk to greet and welcome guests. He can't just choose to work from home. A junior doctor on the hospital ward has to see all the patients on the list. She can't just decide to ignore the patients who are rude to her. But what makes the concept of ownership so powerful is that you can integrate it into almost any situation. All too often, when we find ourselves in a situation we don't like, we start feeling fatalistic. I don't like where I live, but it's not in my power to move. I don't like where this relationship is going, but it's not in my power to alter it. I find this work boring, but it's not in my power to change it. Sometimes we're right, there's nothing we can do. But often we have more agency than we realize, if not over the whole situation, then over parts of it. We have control even when we don't know it. Experiment 5, Own the Process. My favorite example of humans' remarkable ability to take ownership of bad situations comes from Filet-O-Fish 66.13 in June 2016. The gentleman behind the Reddit account Filet-O-Fish66 made headlines for getting fired. He'd been working as a software developer at his company for 6 years, where his work mostly involved testing software in the quality assurance department. It was deeply boring. All he did was run the same old tests on the same old software, following the same old scripts every time. So Filet-O-Fish66 came up with a plan. Without alerting his boss, he spent the first 8 months of his employment programming software to automate his job. From then on, the custom programs he'd written worked on autopilot, running the quality assurance test perfectly. His boss never checked on him because everything was going well. As he wrote in a post on Reddit after being fired from around 6 years ago up until now, I have done nothing at work. I am not joking. For 40 hours each week I go to work, play a League of Legends in my office, browse Reddit, and do whatever I feel like. In the past 6 years I have maybe done 50 hours of real work, so basically nothing, and nobody really cared. Unfortunately for Filet-O-Fish66, over half a decade into his ingenious plan, someone at IT figured out what was going on and reported it to his boss. He was sacked for having the audacity to automate his own job. I'm not suggesting that Filet-O-Fish66 was someone with an impeccable career strategy nor that he was a paragon of virtue. But I do suspect that Filet-O-Fish66's actions hint at the first way we can build our sense of ownership, even in situations in which we have little independence. When we can take ownership of the situation, we can still take ownership of the process. When we can't take ownership of the situation, we can still take ownership of the process. Filet-O-Fish66 had realized that he might not have ownership over what he did, as he had to do what his boss said. But he chose to take ownership over how he did it. There were plenty of things he didn't have any influence over: the software he was testing, the priorities of his manager, the amount of work he was given. But there were plenty of tasks that were entirely in his hands: how he got through the to-do list, how he managed his time, how he made use of the tools he was given. That was how he realized that his job could be automated, and came to spend 8 months building the systems and processes to do just that. There's a lesson here for us all. There's almost always a way for us to own the process of a task, even when the outcome has been determined by someone else. If you work in customer service, you may not have control over the company's policies, but you can take ownership of how you interact with customers. You can make an effort to listen to their concerns, empathize with their frustrations, and find creative solutions to their problems. If you're a teacher, you may not have control over the curriculum, but you can take ownership of how you teach the material. You can find innovative ways to engage your students, create fun activities that reinforce the concepts, and give personalized feedback that helps each student improve. And if you work in a factory or on an assembly line, you may not have control over the production goals, but you can take ownership of how you contribute to the process. You can find ways to streamline your tasks, identify potential quality issues before they become problems, and offer suggestions for process improvements. There's an extraordinary power to be gained by doing it your way, even in the most disempowering circumstances. Experiment 6, Own Your Mindset. The final way to build our sense of intrinsic motivation is one I developed while working as a junior doctor. I first encountered it towards the end of a long shift in the obstetrics and gynecology ward. Just as I was preparing to leave, one of the nurses stopped me and asked, "Dr. Ollie, please can you put this intravenous room 4 line into the lady in bed 4? My heart sank." I knew the patient's veins would be tough to find, and trying to put this line in her was going to delay my leaving the hospital for at least another half hour. As I gathered the equipment, I felt an undercurrent of resentment. If I'd just left a few minutes earlier, it would have been the night doctor's job to put the line in. I could have been driving home, picking up a McDonald's on the way, listening to an audiobook. Now I had to stay behind and sort this annoying task out. But then I overheard a patient in another bay talking to her husband. She was gushing about how wonderful her experience of hospital had been and how grateful she was for the doctors and nurses looking after her. It made me pause. I was about to use my medical training and practical skills to put in a room in 4-line so that we could give a young lady, 12 weeks pregnant with her first child, foods overnight to help with her nausea. It was to make her feel much better. And it was going to help the baby growing inside her as well. How could I possibly be grumbling about this? This was the job I'd chosen. I'd been through 8 years of medical training to get to the point where I could be helpful to a patient suffering in front of me. And now that I was finally given the chance to really make a difference, I was complaining about an extra few minutes of work. I couldn't choose whether or not to put in the Roman 4 drip, I realized. But I could change my mindset. I recalled an idea I'd first encountered in an interview with the writer Seth Godin. Wandering around with a frown and thinking, why do I have to do this, was a decision. And I could decide to think about it another way. I choose to do this, I could tell myself. I get to do this, or even, I'm blessed to do this, with this mindset shift from have to choose to. I walked into the patient's bay with a spring in my step and a smile on my face, ready to help insert the line. I'm not the first person to have drawn upon this method. In 2021, a group of academics crafted an ingenious set of Studies 13 designed to test whether the mere idea of owning one's actions could affect their perceptions and behaviors. Half the participants were randomly assigned to a group where they were asked to write about 3 choices they'd made the previous day. For example, I chose to wake up early yesterday, I chose to eat instant noodles for lunch, I chose to wake up on my second alarm and move on with my day. The other half of the participants were instead asked to just write about 3 things they did the previous day. I ate breakfast, I went shopping, I went to the gym. Once both groups had done the writing task, they were asked to reflect on their lives more broadly. In one part of the study, the participants were asked to rate themselves in terms of physical strength, answering questions like, how muscular are you, how physically strong are you, and how well built are you, on a 5-point scale. The ones who remembered their choices subsequently rated themselves as significantly more muscular, strong, and well built compared to the control group. As the authors put it, increasing the salience of choice led to a sense of self-inflation, a sense of being positively different, bigger, and stronger than others. Simply switching their mindset from have to choose to they boosted their sense of control, power, and, in turn, what they were capable of. You can do the same. Have to is coercive language that makes you feel powerless. Choose to is autonomy-affirming language that makes you feel powerful. Whenever you feel you must do something, think again. How did your choices lead you to this moment? And is there a way to turn this have to into a choose to? And if you're doing something you really didn't choose, what choices can you make around your approach? Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and survivor of the Auschwitz concentration camp during World War II, put it beautifully. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. In summary, power is a scary word, but it doesn't have to be. When we say the second energizer is power, we don't mean exerting control over others. Here, we simply mean feeling empowered to take your job, life and future into your own hands. There are 3 ways you can increase your sense of power, starting now. Begin with confidence. We think our confidence is fixed, but actually it's extremely malleable. So why not try flipping the confidence switch and playing the role of someone who's already filled with self-belief? Next, level up your skills. Ask yourself, if I were completely new to this task, what would this look like? And how can I start teaching others even though I'm not an expert yet? Finally, see what you can do to take ownership, even in moments when you don't have as much control as you'd like. Remember, if you can't choose what you work on, you can still choose how you work on it. The outcome isn't always in your hands, but the process, and certainly your mindset, often is. Quick question, if you could ask the author one thing, what would it be? Comment below, I'm curious. Chapter 3, People. Have you ever noticed that after hanging out or working with certain people, you feel like you're ready to take on the world? These are the people who uplift your spirits and fill you with energy. You want to be around them. On the other hand, you've also probably come across people who leave you feeling drained and exhausted after every interaction. It's as if they cast a shadow over your mood and motivation. People learn to avoid them like the plague. And they learn fast. A friend of mine refers to the latter group as energy vampires. They suck the lifeblood out of a social situation, leaving everybody in the vicinity exhausted. When I first heard of the term energy vampire, I thought it was a bit too harsh and a bit too fantastical. But she had a point. Scientists have long been aware of what they call relational energy, the fact that our interactions with others can have a profound effect on our mood. In a study in 2003, psychology professors Rob Cross, Wayne Baker, and Andrew Parker came up with the concept of an energy map. They worked with consultants and managers in a few giant firms to establish who worked with whom and the impact that any given person had on other people's energy levels. Their discovery? That there was a remarkable amount of agreement about who was an energizer and who was a drainer even at the level of large organizations. Some people are just a total nightmare to be around. In the years since, relational energy has become one of the buzziest concepts in organizational science. Defined as a positive feeling and sense of increased resourcefulness experienced as a direct result of an interaction with someone else, relational energy was the subject of only 8 studies in 2010. By 2018, the number was closer to 80. So relational energy provides us with our final energizer, people. As that 2003 study showed, people can enhance our mood and make us more productive. But this isn't a given. It requires deep thought about how we connect with each other. In this chapter, we'll explore various ways we can surround ourselves with people to feel more energized and to do more of the things that matter. Find using our first insight into the feel-good effects of people comes from the world of 1970s glam rock. It was the beginning of a new decade, and Brian Eno looked to be on his way to a life of contented mediocrity. A recent graduate of the Winchester School of Art, he had been involved in a few avant-garde music projects in recent years, drumming in the odd art rock band and recording the odd song on his battered tape recorder, but nothing had quite taken off. He seemed set for life as a well-liked but peripheral player in London's rock world. And then, one day in 1971, a chance encounter with a local musician changed everything. Eno was waiting for his train when he bumped into an acquaintance, the saxophonist Andy Mackay, who invited him to a local club where he was playing. When they arrived at the gig, the atmosphere was electric, the crowd was buzzing with excitement, and the energy in the room gripped Eno. Later, he would say of the chance meeting with Mackay, if I'd walked 10 yards further on the platform, or missed that train, or been in the next carriage, I probably would have been an art teacher now. Instead, Eno found himself in the midst of a vibrant and exciting music scene. In the weeks that followed, he talked to the people he met about music and found himself producing the best art of his life. With Mackay, he would found the influential glam rock band Roxy Music and eventually become one of the most significant musicians and producers of the last century. Years later, Eno would reflect on the importance of that unique musical community in launching his career. He noticed that all the most innovative and groundbreaking musicians of his time were not working in isolation. They were part of a larger scene of artists, producers, and fans who were all pushing each other to explore new sounds and ideas. Eno had discovered the genius of the collective scene, or, as he called it, scenius. I'd experienced the effects of scenius firsthand. One thing I didn't like about medical school was the sense of competition. Everyone was trying to get the highest grade, the academic prize, the best lot in the residency program. Some took this competitive mindset a little far. One guy I knew would take out multiple copies of the same textbook from the library so that others couldn't use it. Such environments encourage people to see their lives as a zero-sum game. For them to win, others have to lose. But there's another way to think about your relationship with your peers, I eventually learned. Medical school wasn't a competition. We were all part of the same scene. By understanding that fact, we were able to access a wealth of support that we would never have alone. Experiment 1. The comrade mindset. How can we build this sense of scenius into our day-to-day lives? The answer begins with a subtle shift, reappraising what we mean by teamwork. When someone says the word teamwork, we tend to imagine a set of behaviors splitting up work fairly, or maybe helping someone out when they get stuck. That's part of it, certainly. But there's another way of understanding teamwork. Less is something to do, and more is a way of thinking. Teamwork is as much a psychological state as a way of dividing up tasks. This is the suggestion of Stanford professors Gregory Walton and Priyanka Kaur at 3 Anyway. They've argued that teamwork is as much a psychological state as a way of dividing up tasks. In a study published in 2014, they divided 35 participants into groups of 3 to 5. After the experimentees had met and introduced themselves, they were taken into individual rooms. The scientists then gave each participant a puzzle and told them they could take as much or as little time to solve it as they needed. After working on their puzzles for several minutes, all participants received a handwritten tip on how to solve them. All the tips were the same and were genuinely helpful. But there was one crucial difference. When some participants were given the tip, they were told it had been written for them by the scientist running the study. Others were told it had been written for them by one of the fellow participants, who they met earlier. This small difference had a significant impact on how the participants felt about the experiment. Those who were told that the tip was from the scientists were more likely to feel like they were working completely separately from the participants they met. When asked to describe what they did in the study, some replied, "I did an individual puzzle while other people did the same puzzle. They were working in parallel, not together." In contrast, people who were told that the tip was from a fellow student were more likely to feel as if they were on a team with the others. They felt like they were trying to collaborate with an invisible partner to solve the problem by sending each other tips. When asked how they felt during the study, some participants wrote, "I would feel obligated to work hard on the puzzle so as not to disappoint other people." They were no longer working in parallel. They were working together. This subtle change of mindset had a remarkable effect. Participants in the Together group ended up working on the puzzle for 48% longer. They had developed what I call a comrade mindset, and they were doing better as a result. This subtle difference between working in parallel and working together might seem small, but it hints at the first tool we can use to harness the energizing effects of people. Even if we're on our own and undertaking a task, we can convince ourselves that we're part of a team and do so with remarkable ease. The trick is to deliberately think about the people you're working alongside as part of your team. Look at the following list. What would it take to move your focus away from the column on the left and towards the column on the right? What would it look like if these people weren't competitors, but comrades? If you're an employee, could you recruit people to work with you and rely on each other for moral support? If you're a student, can you share your notes or find ways to revise in groups? Competitor mindset, comrade mindset, you win, I lose, you win. I win, my success, our success, I rise by outdoing others, we rise by lifting others, as Walton concluded. Simply feeling as if you're part of a team of people working on a task makes people more motivated as they take on challenges. When the going gets tough, it's better to have friends to lean on than enemies to lord it over. Experiment 2. Find synchronicity. There are moments when it can be difficult to find people to collaborate with, of course. Sometimes, it can be hard to force yourself to think about people working on the other side of the campus, let alone world, as part of the same team. Sometimes, our peers can simply be rather annoying. In these moments, we can draw upon a second tool, one I first came across via a confoundingly clever study by 3 academics at Ryerson University in Canada. In a 2017 paper, these academics brought together for a group of 100 students to investigate the science of teamwork. After being divided into groups of 6, the students were given headphones and asked to tap their hand on the table to a musical beat. Some groups of 6 were briefly all given the same musical beat, so they were tapping in synchrony. In other groups of 6, 2 subgroups of 3 were given the same music to tap to. Finally, some people were given 6 completely different soundtracks, so there was no synchrony at all. After that, the headphones were taken away and replaced by some new props. Each participant was now given 10 tokens to dole out, which they were told would be converted into real money later. Who did they want to give them to? What the scientists were interested in testing was the sense of camaraderie between the participants who were in sync. And they found that the level of musical synchronicity changed everything. When participants spent time tapping fingers in synchrony with the trio, they wanted to dole out money to the trio. But if 2 of these trios tapped in sync, forming a group of 6 for a few minutes, the members were more likely to donate to all 6. Synchronicity makes us want to help others. And it makes us want to help ourselves. What does any of this have to do with the feel-good effects of other people? Well, it tells us something powerful about how to create a sense of teamwork. When we work in synchrony with other people, we tend to be more productive. Synchronicity makes us want to help others. And it makes us want to help ourselves. The implications are simple. If we want to harness the feel-good effects of people, try to find people with whom to work in sync even if you aren't actively collaborating on the same task. In the course of writing this book, I often attended the London Writers' Salon, which runs a free, remote karaoke group called Writers' Hour. Every weekday, 4 times a day, a few hundred writers and some non-writers assemble on a Zoom video call. The facilitator spends 5 minutes sharing a motivational message and asking participants to post in the online chat what their intention for their writing session is going to be. Then, for 50 minutes, everyone minimizes their Zoom window and works away at their computer. I continue to find these sync sessions incredibly helpful for staying energized. Even though we're all working on different things, working in tandem with others has huge effects on my ability to focus, and helps me feel better too. Feel the help is high. I noticed something else in those virtual writing sessions. With time, I got to know the other people in my group. Soon, we'd start messaging each other for support on Zoom. And that would eventually lead me to another dimension of relational energy, the effect of giving and receiving help. It's an effect that Alan Lux understands better than anyone. As the head of Big Brothers Big Sisters of New York City, Lux was responsible for a network of thousands of volunteers and staff members who were dedicated to improving the lives of young people in New York City. The work could be difficult and often upsetting. The organization matched adult mentors with children and teenagers who were often in the throes of huge family crises ranging from imprisonment to addiction to suicide. Lux was passionate about the importance of mentorship and the impact it could have on young people. But it was tough. And yet as his months at Big Brothers Big Sisters turned to years, Lux started to notice something odd. Yes, the volunteers were sometimes left exhausted or upset by what they experienced. But more often, they left even the trickiest mentoring sessions highly energized. Lux began to realize that the act of giving could transform not only the lives of the people being helped, but also the lives of the volunteers themselves. Intrigued by this phenomenon, over the next few years he interviewed thousands of volunteers who had experience helping others. They all said they chose to do this work because, in part, it made them feel great. He found that 95% of the volunteers reported feeling happier, more fulfilled, and more energized as a result of their service. Why might that be? Lux's research showed that when we help others, our brains release a flood of chemicals that create a natural high. Feel-good hormones like oxytocin surge through our bodies, creating a wave of positive energy that can last for hours, even days after the helping has ended. Lux realized that the helper's high wasn't just a feeling. It was a powerful tool for growth, social change, and, I would add, feel-good productivity. It's the second way we can use the feel-good effects of other people to do more of what matters to us. Experiment 3. Random acts of kindness. When I worked as a doctor, whenever I had a few minutes spare between seeing patients, I'd get up to make myself a cup of tea. On one level, this was a selfish act. I am arguably Britain's leading tea connoisseur. But I also had half an eye on the wider team. On my way to the kitchen, I'd poke my head into the nurse's office and ask if anyone would like me to make them a cup too. This tiny act seemed to have a weirdly significant effect on team morale. I vividly remember offering Julie, one of the senior nurses, a cup of tea at the height of the COVID pandemic. She looked like I'd just offered her a winning lottery ticket. All for a lowly tea bag, some hot water, and a splash of milk, crucially, in that order. These random acts of kindness offer the first way to integrate the helper's high into our day-to-day lives. By stopping what you're doing and offering help to people at random, you can boost your endorphin levels and help yourself work harder. Tea is not the only such act of kindness, of course. You can integrate kindnesses into every day, whatever your situation. Say you work in an office. Have you noticed that someone around you looks bored, or a little burned out? Why not take them out for lunch instead of having a sandwich at your desk? Or perhaps you're in the supermarket and someone behind you looks stressed, maybe they have young children. Why not let them go in front of you in a queue? Or say someone has done you an act of kindness, even a little one. They've taken a task that was on your to-do list at a busy time. Why not write them a personalized thank you note? There are any number of these random acts of kindness. Making a colleague a drink. Writing a friend a thank you note. Offering a stranger your place in line. All subtle, but all subtly transformative too. Experiment 4. Ask for help from others. The helper's high also shows us that asking for help from others can actually be a gift to them, rather than the burden we usually assume it will be. This was an epiphany experienced by the young Benjamin Franklin, the polymathic founding father of the United States, who, over his 84-year life, would philosophize on the nature of statecraft, found Philadelphia's first fire department, and signed the U.S. Declaration of Independence. In 1737, though, all that was far ahead of him. Franklin was running for re-election in the Pennsylvania Assembly. A rival legislator was saying some unfavorable things about him. He had completely opposing views to Franklin, and they had strained off and frosty relationship. Franklin desperately needed to stop this man's propaganda campaign against him. It was at risk of blowing up his bid for re-election. But how could he win over someone who didn't agree with him on anything? The answer, he explained in his autobiography, involved borrowing a book. Having heard that he had in his library a certain very scarce and curious book, I wrote a note to him expressing my desire of perusing that book, and requesting he would do me the favor of lending it to me for a few days. Franklin wrote. To Franklin's surprise, his nemesis sent it immediately. When Franklin returned the book, he included a note expressing how much he enjoyed it. Surprisingly, this had a profound impact on their relationship. When we next met in the house, he spoke to me which he had never done before, and with great civility, Franklin wrote. And he ever after manifested a readiness to serve me on all occasions, so that we became great friends, and our friendship continued to his death. This seemingly small act borrowing a book had a significant effect on Franklin's opponent and on Franklin himself. The man was so surprised by the gesture that he began to see Franklin in a new light. He couldn't reconcile the fact that he had helped someone he disagreed with. As a result, the man's attitude towards Franklin began to change for the better. This concept is today known as the Benjamin Franklin effect. It suggests that when we ask someone for help, it's likely to make them think better of us. It's the flip side of the transformative effects of helping others. We can ask others to help us, which will help them feel better too. It's a pity, then, that most of us are bad at asking for help. We might need a crucial piece of information from a colleague, but instead of bothering them, we try to figure it out ourselves, wasting time in the process. Or we might be struggling with a particular problem in class, but find ourselves not wanting to ask for help from the person next to us, or even the teacher, for fear of looking stupid. So how can we learn to ask for help in a way that warms people to us, rather than alienates them? Well, there are a few ways. First, we need to get over our reluctance to ask. The easiest way to do this is by simply adopting a maxim: people are more eager to help than you think. We have by now repeatedly seen how energizing it can be to make others smile, to teach, and to mentor. Even so, a lot of us underestimate how willing other people are to help us. According to the academics Francis Flynn and Vanessa Bond, people tend to underestimate the likelihood that other people will agree to help us by up to 50%. 7. Second, frame the request in the right way. In particular, do your best to ask for help in person. Asking virtually makes everything more difficult. In a 2017 study, one found that help seekers assumed making a request via email would be equally as effective as making a request in person. In actuality, asking for help in person was approximately 34 times more effective. Finally, make sure you're using the right language. Avoid using negative phrases like "I feel really bad for asking you this," and avoid turning it into a transaction by saying things like "If you help me, I'll do this for you." Instead, emphasize the positive reasons for why you're going to that specific person for advice. "I saw your work on X, Y, Z, and it really had an impact on me. I would love to hear how you did A, B, C." By emphasizing the positive aspects of the person you admire, they'll think you genuinely value their opinion and be more likely to help you. This last insight is key. When framed correctly, asking for help makes the person you're asking feel as good as the help makes you feel. If you want to harness the power of the Benjamin Franklin effect, you should do everything you can to ask without any sense of a quid pro quo. Over-communicate. When I first launched my business, the thing I struggled with most was the need for communication. To be precise, quite how much of it was necessary. I knew that sharing information was important, obviously. What I hadn't realized was how much I needed to communicate. I eventually realized, usually thanks to helpful pointers from my long-suffering team, that my fears about being too overbearing had made me not communicate enough. I wasn't giving the positive or negative feedback that most of my team members really wanted. This is a common phenomenon. We're much more likely to underestimate how much communication we need to do than overestimate it. When you think you've communicated plenty, you almost certainly haven't. So when most books about bringing people together focus on communication, here I want to focus on the power of over-communication. When you think you've communicated plenty, you almost certainly haven't. Different team members might interpret the shared information in different ways or have different levels of context or understanding. Over-communicating means deliberately going beyond the minimum you think is necessary and consequently ending up sharing exactly the right amount. But how? Experiment 5. Over-communicate. The good Swedish proverb says, "A shared joy is a double joy, a shared sorrow is a half sorrow." When one person shares good news with another, both people are happy. And when one person shares something sad with another, the act of sharing takes some of the sadness away. The first tactic for over-communicating the good, then, is to share positive news and to react to positive news in an energizing way. This helps both the sharer and the responder. For the sharer, the simple act of sharing positive news increases positive emotions and psychological well-being. For the responder, expressing pride and happiness in the other person's accomplishments fuels a positive interaction and bolsters the relationship. In psychology, this form of self-reinforcing positive interaction is called capitalization. One paper on the subject characterizes capitalization as involving two components. 9. The first part involves someone the share trying to connect with someone else through a positive event and the positive emotions associated with it. For example, you might go to a friend and say, "Hey, I finally got that salary raise I was looking for." In the second part, the good news recipient reacts in a positive way, with enthusiasm and excitement. So they might say, "Oh wow, that's so great. I know you've been working really hard for that raise." Simple, perhaps, but not necessarily straightforward. Because, according to the University of California psychology professor Shelley Gable, there are myriad ways you can respond to good news and not all of them are as positive. We can think of these as falling on two axes. First, whether your response is active or passive, and second, whether your response is constructive or destructive. Suppose your flatmate returns home one day and tells you that they've been offered a job that they've been working hard for. Here are how these 4 different responses would look like. Cheerleader Charlie. An active constructive response would be something like, "Wow, that's great. You've been working so hard for this. I knew you'd get it." Easygoing Emma. A passive constructive response would be some kind of understated response, like giving them a gentle nod and smiling, then saying, "That's good news. Envious Ethan." An active disruptive response would be some kind of response that undermines your flatmate's success. Or, "Does that mean you're going to be too busy to hang out in the evenings and on weekends then?" Self-centered Sam. The passive destructive response would basically ignore your flatmate's good news. "Well, you won't believe what happened to me today." Gable and her colleagues found that responding to good news in an active constructive way makes the sharer of the good news happier and makes the relationship stronger. Indeed, in a 2006 study, researchers videotaped 79 couples who were dated in to examine how they discussed good news and bad news with each other. It turns out that how participants responded to their partner's good news was the strongest predictor of how long they'd stay together and how happy they were in those relationships. So being able to celebrate people's wins matters. And the best way to do so is to adopt an active, constructive approach to all good news. Fortunately, this is something we can learn. The first step is to feel and show your delight and joy for the other person's good news. Try phrases like, "That's such wonderful news and I couldn't be happier for you." Next, recall to the sharer of good news how you've actively witnessed the process that led to the good news. Perhaps you've seen how hard they've worked to prepare for that job interview, the weeks they studied for the qualifying exam, how much they wanted that outcome. And above all, show your optimism for how this good news might shape their future without overburdening them with high expectations. If someone's just landed a dream job, share how excited you are for the opportunities ahead of them. If someone's just quit a mundane job to start their own business, share how excited you are for them about their future adventures. Over-communication won't just inspire them. It will inspire you too. At every turn, try to make your over-communication about the good as positive and as uplifting as possible. Over-communication won't just inspire them. It will inspire you too. Experiment 6. Over-communicate the not-so-good in order to really harness the feel-good effects of other people. We don't just need to communicate good news, though. We need to learn to communicate bad news too. Unfortunately, we're not always very good at that. The problem is that we humans are just too good at lying. It's not just that we lie every day, we lie every hour. According to a 2002 study conducted by University of Massachusetts psychologist Robert Feldman, 60% of people lie at least once in an average 10-minute conversation. 11. Not all lies are created equal, of course. Most lies are trivial and told with good intentions, like telling a friend that you love his new trainers when they're not your style, or reassuring your mother that the roast chicken is absolutely not dry. But there's a downside. Lying, even lying with good intentions, has a physiological effect. Lying is associated with the activation of the limbic system, the same area of the brain that initiates the fight or flight response. When we're honest, this area of the brain shows minimal activity. When telling a lie, it lights up like a fireworks display. The reason for all this lying is that honesty often feels like a lose-lose situation. We lose if we're too honest because we come across like a jerk. But we also lose if we're not honest because we feel resentful about being stuck in a situation that we're not okay with. This is tricky for anyone who has adopted the maxim of over-communication. We need to communicate the bad stuff without lying needlessly. Is there a way? According to author and CEO coach Kim Scott, the solution is not to be honest but candid. 12. In her book Radical Candor, Scott writes that being radically candid is about caring personally, that is, genuinely caring about the person you're speaking to while also directly challenging the issue at hand. Being radically candid doesn't mean making the issue personal, it doesn't mean assuming you know best, and it doesn't mean saying whatever pops into your head. It does mean sharing your opinions directly, not talking badly about people behind their backs, and giving your coworkers insight into what's going on in your head. Choosing the word candid over honest has some benefits. Being honest implies that you know the truth. It often has a moral connotation to it that can put people off. The memory of my school friend James insulting my car tricks with a flippant "I'm just being honest" haunts me to this day. When we say, "Let me be honest with you," it's almost as if we're saying, "This is the truth and I'm going to tell you what it is," but when it comes to interpersonal dynamics, the truth is often unclear. Your line manager might feel like a drainer to you, but it might not be true that this person is an objectively bad manager. For all we know, they could be a good manager for other people, or maybe they're going through something in their personal lives that's affecting them at work. In contrast, being candid doesn't assume that we know the truth. The spirit of being candid is more like, "Here's what I think. Can you hear me out or help me out? We can do it together. So how can we all learn to craft a culture of candid feedback, one that delivers negative feedback without ruining anyone's day?" Well, there are a few steps to follow. First, root your analysis in objective, non-judgmental terms. I noticed you cut Hermione off a few times and that meeting is much more effective than you are incredibly rude. Similarly, telling people you're wrong or you're incompetent is going to make that person feel attacked and defensive. It's too subjective, not to mention a little rude too. Just stick to the facts. Second, focus on the tangible results of what's gone wrong. Again, subjectivity is your enemy. So simply highlight, factually, the consequence of what you observed. For example, I noticed that after you interrupted Ron in the meeting, the discussion died down a bit. That's a real shame because I would have really liked to hear what other people have to say. Finally, turn your attention away from the problem and towards the solution. Provide alternatives of what you'd like to see happen. For example, next time, please wait until people are finished speaking before sharing your thoughts, or next time, maybe you could ask people questions to show that you're interested in their view but might not agree with them. I feel like asking questions might get a better reaction from them and maybe lead to collaboration. Offering alternatives focuses the discussion on possible solutions to the problem and helps the other person avoid feeling personally criticized. These 3 steps are a simple way to make over-communication of unpleasant news a little easier. They all hint at the notion that it's possible to bring people together and make them feel good, even when you're delivering bad news. Not a lie in sight. In summary, life is more fun with friends around. That's why our third energizer is people. There are some people who naturally uplift our energy. The trick is finding them. That starts with becoming a team player. Try treating the people you're working with as comrades rather than competitors. Building connections with people is also about lending them a hand. This cuts both ways. Not only do we too rarely help others, we also too rarely ask for help. So try asking, "What can I do to brighten someone else's day?" Finally, remember the most oft-forgotten truth about human interaction. When you think you've communicated too much, you probably haven't communicated enough. Is there a piece of information you're hoarding that might just make someone else's week? If you're new here, I post audio versions of powerful books every week. Hit subscribe so you never miss one. Part 2, Unblock. Chapter 4, See Clarity. One of the strangest videos I've ever seen is called How Bad Do You Want It? One it's been viewed almost 50 million times. The video recounts the story of a young man who goes to an unspecified guru and asks for his advice on how to become rich. The next day, they agree to meet by a beach so the guru can explain the answer. At 4 a.m. the following morning, the man arrives at the seashore. Walk on out in the water, the guru tells him. The young man does. Walk a little further, says the guru. The man does. Keep walking, the guru says. He keeps walking until his head is fully submerged. Suddenly, the guru is there by the young man holding his head beneath the surface. The young man struggles violently, but the old man holds him down, only releasing him when he's on the verge of drowning. As the young man gasps for air, the old man says, when you want to succeed as badly as you want to breathe, then you'll be successful. There's a lot going on in this video. Who actually is the guru and how precisely does one get that job title? Why is the young man so willing to walk out into the sea at said guru's request? Haven't they just met? Most peculiarly of all, why are there 20,000 comments underneath the video in which people say it has completely changed their life? These days, I find the video both surreal and somewhat depressing. But the first time I watched, I was in the throes of a bout of debilitating procrastination and I thought it might help. When I first launched my business while working as a junior doctor, it seemed like no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break free from the cycle of putting things off and scrambling to catch up. I wasn't alone. Procrastination has plagued much greater minds than mine. Take Leonardo da Vinci. One contemporary who saw him painting The Last Supper wrote how he would go for 2, 3, or 4 days without touching his brush, but spending several hours a day in front of the work, his arms folded, examining and criticizing the figures to himself. In these moments, the 3 Energizes play, power and people aren't enough. In part 1, we explored how these 3 forces can help us feel good in our work and life, boosting our energy and helping us do more of what matters to us. But by themselves, they're not the whole story. As my business grew, I realized that however much I integrated the Energizers into my life, I could still come unstuck because of another P, procrastination. When procrastination has been a problem for me, I've often been tempted to turn to obvious hacks just like the one in that weird video. If you're procrastinating, the video says it's because you're not motivated enough. And if you just had enough motivation, if only you wanted to succeed as badly as you wanted to breathe, it would happen. I call the solution to procrastination the motivation method. It's very common. And it's total nonsense. The trouble with the motivation method is very simple. There are plenty of us who genuinely do want to do the things we struggle with. We feel like we've got enough motivation, but there are barriers that get in our way: time and financial constraints, family responsibilities, physical and mental health issues, among countless other things. Motivation clearly isn't enough. And telling people to simply feel more motivated isn't just unhelpful, it's potentially harmful, contributing to the sense of paralysis that caused procrastination in the first place. So when motivation fails, where do we turn? When not obsessing over whether you truly are motivated, much advice turns to another principle: discipline. Put simply, discipline is when we do stuff that we don't feel like doing. It's the opposite of motivation. It's taking action despite how unmotivated you are. If you're trying to go for a jog, a motivated response would be, I feel like going for a run because I want to win the marathon more than I want to rest today. A disciplined response would be, I'm going for a run regardless of how I feel about it. This is the next goal of getting things done. Just do it. I'm a little more sympathetic to the discipline method than the motivation method. Discipline can be useful. Sometimes I don't feel like going to work in the morning, but I do it anyway. Maybe that's discipline. But this narrative isn't complete. If you're procrastinating from writing that speech you've got coming up, it might not necessarily be that you just aren't disciplined enough to prepare for it. There might be something else going on under the surface that's holding you back, and the discipline narrative doesn't care about what it is. It just makes you feel bad about yourself. In the words of psychology professor Joseph Ferrari, to tell a chronic procrastinator to just do it would be like saying to a clinically depressed person, cheer up. Motivation and discipline are useful strategies, but they're band-aid covering up deeper wounds. They might sometimes work to treat the symptoms, but they don't change the underlying condition. So what does work in the age-old fight against procrastination? That's where our third approach comes in. I call it the Unblock method. While the motivation method advised us to make ourselves feel like doing the thing, and the discipline method advised us to ignore how we feel and do it anyway, the Unblock method encourages us to understand why we're feeling bad about work in the first place and tackle the issue head on. The Unblock method encourages us to understand why we're feeling bad about work in the first place. Imagine you've got a pebble in your shoe that makes running particularly painful, but you have to run over to your friend's house in time for dinner. You're torn, you want to arrive on time, but you know that embarking on the journey is going to hurt. What do? The first solution is the easiest. Do nothing. Procrastinate until the evening has been wasted. Miss your dinner and don't get invited next time. The next solution draws upon the motivation method. That would involve convincing yourself that the dinner is going to be exciting and worth the pain of running. You ignore the pain as you race towards your destination, only to collapse on the side of the road halfway there. But you're not worried, as you look down at your quickly swelling foot. When you're sufficiently motivated, you'll be able to overcome any obstacle after all. The third solution is the discipline method. You've committed to the dinner, and you're the sort of person who keeps their word. So you run to your friend's house, the pebble breaking the delicate skin of your soul, and lo and behold you make it. Unfortunately, the dinner can't go ahead because your friend has to drive you and your bloody stump to the hospital. Discipline is freedom, you recite to yourself as you await medical attention. I would tentatively suggest that all three solutions are off the mark. The fourth and best solution involves a little more critical thinking. What if you took a minute to think, why does getting to my friend's house seem so hard? You take your shoe off, find a pebble and remove it. And then off you'd run. This is the Unblock method, and it's the focus of the next 3 chapters. We'll learn that usually procrastination is caused by negative feelings, the inverse of the feel-good energizers we encountered in part 1. When negative feelings like confusion, fear and inertia stand in our way, we put things off. This leads to even more bad feelings and in turn even more procrastination. It's a negative loop of low mood and stagnation. Fortunately, the power of all 3 emotional blockers can be reduced. In the pages that follow, we'll explore how precisely these negative feelings affect us and sap our energy. I will use the science of feel-good productivity to strategically overcome each of them. The F or G of uncertainty, the first blocker to feel-good productivity, is the simplest. But it's also one of the hardest to notice. It's so common that we don't even realize it's there. Picture yourself driving on a foggy evening. You squinting to see the road ahead. You try to make the front lights even brighter, but the fog just isn't clearing. Eventually, you realize you need to pull over as the fog is debilitating. This is a little like the sensation of procrastinating. Often, the reason we don't make a start is because we don't know what we're supposed to be doing in the first place. A mystifying fog is set in around us. I call it the fog of uncertainty. This is a well-studied phenomenon, one that scientists call uncertainty paralysis. It happens when we become overwhelmed by the unknowns or the complexity of a situation, leading to an inability to act. This paralysis prevents us from making progress on tasks, projects, or decisions. It gets in the way of feeling good and gets in the way of getting things done. Uncertainty makes us feel bad and so achieve less. Humans have an innate aversion to what we don't know. We naturally prefer predictability and stability, which is what allows us to be decisive and effective. But at the same time, some of us are better at dealing with uncertainty than others. Psychologists and psychiatrists measure this using something called the intolerance of uncertainty inventory 3IUI. Developed by Mitchell Gigas and his colleagues in the 1990s, the inventory consists of a series of statements that express tolerance of uncertainty. One statement reads, "Not knowing what will happen in advance is often unacceptable for me. To measure how tolerant to uncertainty you are, psychologists look at the extent to which you agree with each statement and aggregate your responses to create an overall score." The IUI offers the first hint as to how and why uncertainty drives procrastination. People with a low tolerance of uncertainty tend to view uncertain situations as threatening and anxiety-provoking, leading them to put things off, particularly on tasks involving any ambiguity. Why? Well, according to a review on the relationship between anxiety and uncertainty, for there are a handful of processes that reinforce the loop between uncertainty, anxiety, and paralysis. 1. We overestimate what's at stake. Someone who's already anxious will think that the uncertain event is going to be worse than it already is. 2. We become hypervigilant. Sensing that something negative might happen, our safety and any prick up to the sign of any potential danger. 3. We stop recognizing safety cues. Because we're hypervigilant to threats, we're not able to calm down when there really is no danger. 4. We become avoidant. Our brains encourage us to adopt behavioral and cognitive avoidance strategies to get us out of there as soon as possible. Anyone who has ever procrastinated will recognize at least some of these factors. Consider a common source of uncertainty, like choosing a career path. Suppose you're in a stable job, but you're contemplating quitting for a less stable but potentially more fulfilling career. The uncertainty surrounding the less stable path might set off this process as follows. 1. Overestimation. You overestimate the negative consequences of choosing the wrong career path, like not making enough money. 2. Hypervigilance. You become overly attentive to signs that could indicate the success or failure of a particular career choice, like statistics that suggest that lots of people regret changing jobs. 3. Unrecognition. You stop identifying the factors that would contribute to a successful outcome, like doing research on the company you're considering joining. 4. Avoidance. You decide to put off making this career decision completely. After all, it can't be that bad, sticking it out for another year in your current job. The result, you experience heightened emotional reactions, such as anxiety or fear, and that makes you procrastinate from making a career decision for even longer. You feel worse, and so you do less. Most of us have experienced struggles of this kind. But the good news is that the cycle can be broken and the fog of uncertainty eliminated. It's a simple matter of asking a few well-placed questions. Once they're answered, the road ahead becomes much clearer. Ask why. The main way uncertainty drives procrastination is by creating ambiguity over our ultimate purpose. If we don't know why we're embarking on any given project, it's near impossible to get on with actually doing it. This, at least, is the conclusion that the US Army came to in 1982, the year the US Army published an updated version of their official field manual FM 100-5, Operations. The military's main how to fight guide, the FM outlined to officials the methods most likely to bring them success on the battlefield. At its heart was a new concept, commander's intent. Commander's intent is rooted in a German military tradition dating back to the Prussian army of the late 19th century. German military strategists realized that no battle plan could ever predict the chaotic realities of war. No plan survives first contact with the enemy, as Field Marshal Moltke the Elder put it. To be precise, he said, no plan of operations extends with certainty beyond the first encounter with the enemy's main strength, but that's not as catchy. So instead of obsessing over every step that soldiers might take on the battlefield, German officers embraced the concept of Auftragtaktik mission-type tactics, a philosophy that prioritized a clear sense of why over an excessively detailed sense of how. Commander's intent, as outlined in the field manual, consists of three crucial components all built around the basic point of the mission. 1. The purpose behind the operation. 2. The end state that the commander was aiming for. 3. The key tasks that the commander felt should be taken to accomplish the objective. Commander's intent suggested that the goal of generals is to answer only the highest level why questions, identifying the purpose behind the operation, and, a push, vaguely sketching out the sort of stages that might be necessary. The troops were then given the flexibility to adapt their decisions to the changing circumstances at the front. This approach transcends a battlefield. Understanding commander's intent can help clear the fog of uncertainty by identifying the purpose behind what you're doing. It sheds light on the why. Experiment 1. Using commander's intent. How can we draw upon commander's intent in our own lives? The first answer is illustrated by the events of 6 June 1944 in northern France, better known as D-Day. The Allied invasion of occupied France had been intricately planned. In the first push, 133,000 troops were to land at very precise locations on Normandy beaches. They were to be supported by parachute regiments, who were to land at specific towns and villages, liberate them from the Nazis and secure key bridges and roads. But from 0 hour, quite a lot went wrong. Within minutes of the paratroopers hitting the ground, most of them discovered they'd landed in completely the wrong location. Over the next few hours, it would further become apparent that many regiments had inexplicably been mixed up overnight. Men hadn't landed alongside the units they knew and trusted, and were instead fighting alongside soldiers who they'd never spoken to before. It was, in the words of the strategy writer Chad Storley, a military disaster. 6. And yet miraculously, within hours, D-Day got back on track. The Allies didn't take the villages that they expected, but they did take villages that met their strategic objectives. And the troops landing on Normandy's beaches were able to push inland as planned. The whole saga was a victory of commander's intent. The military general's detailed orders hadn't worked. The specific plans they'd laid out went awry. But because they'd communicated their commander's intent, everyone involved in the operation knew the purpose. The why was clear, and that made it possible to work out an alternative how. Today, I apply this insight to my own life every day. Previously, when I embarked on a project, my instinct was to immediately press ahead, planning every step without ever really thinking about my desired end state. But this level of obsessive planning can prove an obstacle. I would get so bogged down in ticking off specific tasks that I would lose track of what the ultimate point was. So now, before embarking on a new project, I ask myself the first commander's intent question: what is the purpose behind this? And I build my to-do list from there. I've found that asking this simple question can have a remarkable effect. For years, I'd been failing to hit my goal of six-pack abs. Every January, I'd get excited about going to the gym. And then within a few weeks, the motivation would wane and I'd be back at square one. When I applied the concept of commander's intent, I realized it was because I was getting the purpose of the big why completely wrong. I didn't actually want washboard abs. My real goal was to maintain a healthy and balanced physique and lifestyle. Yes, there was some aesthetic motivation, but it paled into insignificance compared to the desire to be healthy, fit and strong. You can apply this approach to almost any question. Take learning French. Ask yourself, what's the purpose? Are you trying to understand complex 19th century realist novels? Or are you just trying to survive your upcoming visit to Paris? Next, work through what implications that has for the process. How are you going to learn the language? Are you going to use Duolingo or take language classes or just watch lots of 1950s French cinema? Similarly, let's say you want to start a business. What's the ultimate purpose? Are you trying to make an extra few $100s a month to be able to go on holiday? Or are you aiming for a multi-million-dollar exit so you can retire early? Or are you building something you think will help people and change lives? Now think about what that means for your next steps. Do you really need to quit your job altogether, or just carve out a few hours in the evenings? Would it be best to rush headlong into creating the business, or do you need to develop your skills first? Experiment 2. The 5 whys you need to remind yourself of this big why every day and every hour. Every email you send, every meeting you hold, every chat over a coffee in ways small and large, they should take you a little closer to realizing that ultimate purpose. This isn't always easy though. Have you ever found that in the middle of a project, you get so bogged down in short-term deadlines and irritating small tasks that you lose track of your ultimate objective? As I've rediscovered while writing this book, you can spend months, years, focusing on irrelevant but pressing tasks, your ultimate purpose completing a full draft, say being shamefully neglected. So how can we ensure that our biggest why is at the heart of our every choice? One suggestion comes from the production lines of early 20th century Japan. In the West, Takeshi Toyota is best known for founding the company that bears his name, Toyota. But in Japan, he has an even loftier reputation, first as the man who revolutionized the country's textiles industry in the late 19th century, and second as the father of the Japanese Industrial Revolution. Above all, Toyota is famous for his obsessive focus on eliminating errors in his factories by ensuring everyone is focused on the things that matter. Toyota always hated misused time and resources. He first made his name for designing a hand loom that stopped automatically when a thread broke, preventing it wasting any further cloth. This emphasis on eliminating waste led him to develop a now famous method called the 5 whys. In its original form, the 5 whys offered a simple method to work out why something had gone wrong. Whenever there was a mistake on the production line, Toyota's staff would ask why 5 times. Say there was a piece of broken down machinery. Why? The first answer would lead them to the immediate cause. Because there was a piece of cloth stuck in the loom, the next would dig a bit deeper. Why? Because everyone was a bit tired and hadn't been paying attention. By the 5th time, the employees would have reached the true source of the problem. Because the culture is terrible at the moment due to our boss being a total nightmare, my twist on Toyota's method is to use the 5 whys not only to explain mistakes, but to determine whether a task is worth doing in the first place. Whenever somebody in my team suggests we embark on a new project, I ask why 5 times. The first time, the answer usually relates to completing a short-term objective. But if it is really worth doing, all that whying should lead you back to your ultimate purpose as laid out in your commander's intent. If it doesn't, you probably shouldn't bother. I find this method helpful in keeping me and my team's attention on what matters. Asking why repeatedly reminds us of what we should really be focusing on and allows us to home in on it. Suddenly, those irrelevant pressing tasks seem less important. The greatest purpose, the big why, comes into sharp relief. Ask what? Once you've identified your why, you'll need to convert it into something slightly more concrete. After all, a nebulous sense of purpose isn't enough to get a project off the ground. You also need a detailed action plan, lest you find yourself with no idea where to start. But identifying what, in practice, you're supposed to be doing isn't always straightforward. Take an example from the workplace. The professional relationship between Jim and his new boss, Charles, wasn't going well. No matter what Jim did, Charles saw him as lazy and serious and unprofessional. He just couldn't seem to make a good impression. One morning, Charles asked Jim to get him a rundown of all Jim's clients. Unfortunately, Jim had no idea what a rundown was. For the rest of the day, Jim wandered around the office trying to somehow figure out what had been asked of him without admitting it to Charles. At the end of the day, Jim had nothing. He walked into Charles's office, sat right down, and finally, completely resigned to however his boss would react, asked, "What's a rundown?" I'm recounting, of course, the plot of Season 5, Episode 23 of the US version of The Office. It's one of the most watched of all time because it depicts the everyday horrors of the modern workplace with hilarious accuracy, micromanaging bosses, office politics, and, above all, that crushing realization that you have absolutely no idea what the task before you involves. This is what I mean by uncertainty over the what. Imagine you're a student struggling to make sense of an assignment, an employee puzzling over vague instructions from your boss, or perhaps you're trying to kickstart a personal project like learning to play the guitar but don't know where to start. In each of these scenarios, uncertainty about what exactly you're supposed to be doing can act as a daunting barrier to even getting started, one that saps your energy and leaves you feeling exhausted before you've even begun. The solution? Turning your abstract purpose into a set of concrete goals and actions. Moving from the why to the what. Experiment 3. Nice goals. The first step in turning your purpose into a plan involves some goal setting. You might know what your ultimate why is, but without a clear end goal, you'll struggle to work out how to get there. But goal setting can be tricky. Of course, everyone can agree that goals are important. The trouble is, nobody can agree on what form they should take. Back in 1981, George T. Doran, a consultant and former director of corporate planning for the Washington Water Power Company, introduced the concept of SMART goals in an issue of Management Review. The acronym stood for specific, measurable, assignable, relevant, time-related, a simple and memorable formula that quickly gained traction in management and personal development circles. As the years went by, countless other acronyms joined the fray, each with its own twist on what makes a goal effective. These included focused, flexible, observable, consistent, universal, simple, explicit, directed, hard, heartfelt, animated, required, difficult, and even banana balanced, absurd, not attainable, nutty, ambitious, to name just a few. Okay, I just made up the last one. All these acronyms have something in common. First, they emphasize the importance of every goal being clear and quantifiable. Whether they're specific or explicit, your goals are supposed to be easily tracked and checked. Second, they are very focused on outcomes. The function of words like measurable and observable is that you can tell, objectively, when you've reached the desired end state. So it would be a pity if it turned out the highly trackable, outcome-oriented goal setting was ineffective. If sometimes, goals of this kind turned out to be an obstacle to productivity rather than the key to it. Unfortunately, that's precisely what a new wave of research seems to indicate. Studies have found that although specific, challenging goals often can increase performance for certain types of people and tasks, they can also have unintended negative consequences. I couldn't believe it when I first encountered this argument. I had spent years setting SMART goals. Suddenly I was being told that they weren't as useful as everyone had assured me. But the science is increasingly clear. One issue is tunnel vision. When we become overly focused on achieving a very specific end goal, we may lose sight of other key factors, like staying true to our values. But the bigger one is the effect they have on our motivation. If we obsess over a goal, we lose track of the intrinsic pleasure that might come from a task. In 2009, researchers at Harvard, Northwestern, the University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Arizona collaborated on a paper titled Goals Gone Wild: The Systematic Side Effects of Overprescribing Goal Setting. They describe goal setting as an addictive and corrosive process, a prescription-grade medication that shouldn't be thought of as a benign, over-the-counter treatment for motivation. I'm not suggesting that all goal setting is bad, or that smart or smart-adjacent goals aren't effective. They certainly do work to motivate performance in certain types of people and for certain tasks. But they've got their harmful side effects. And if you struggle with procrastination, you might benefit from an alternative approach. My preferred method doesn't involve fixating on an external outcome or destination, but instead emphasizes the feel-good journey. It's based on what I call nice goals. Near-term goals ensure that we're concentrating on the immediate steps we need to take along our journey. They help us avoid being overwhelmed by the bigger picture. I find that a daily or weekly objective is the most helpful time horizon. Input-based goals emphasize the process rather than some distant, abstract end goal. Whereas an output-based goal would home in on the end result, lose 5 by the end of the year, hit the bestseller list with my book. An input-based goal would focus on what we can do in the here and now. Go for a 10-minute walk every day, write 100 words each morning for my novel. Controllable, we want to focus on goals that are within our control. Spend 8 hours a day on my novel probably isn't something you can actually do, since many external factors would have to come together for such an input to be possible. Setting a more genuinely controllable goal like allocating 20 minutes per day to the task is far more realistic. Energizing. We've already discussed plenty of principles and strategies for making our projects, tasks, and chores more energizing. Is there a way to integrate play, power, and people into the goals you set yourself? You might even want to use a SMART goal for your long-term objective, but a nice goal for the here and now. Consider a few examples. Fitness, SMART goal, lose 20 pounds within the next 3 months. Nice goal, exercise for 30 minutes daily, focusing on activities that are enjoyable and manageable. Career, SMART goal, get a promotion to a senior management position within 2 years. Nice goal, dedicate an hour each week to improving one key skill or networking with industry professionals. Education, SMART, complete a master's degree in 2 years. Nice, spend 30 minutes each day reviewing course material and work on assignments in manageable chunks. The result will be goals that boost your energy and your feel-good productivity, but which don't ruin your life if you fail to hit them. Experiment 4, the crystal ball method. With your nice goal in sight, you should have a clearer sense of what specifically you need to do, which should make it easier to get started. But before you begin your journey, you might benefit from a little troubleshooting. Envision yourself a week from now. You've clarified what you want to do and why you're doing it. Yet despite all this preparation, you haven't even begun. What went wrong? I call this the crystal ball method, though it's sometimes also known as a pre-mortem. It offers a way to identify the big obstacles to your goal before they have derailed your plans. The idea is simple. By running through what could go wrong in your head, you dramatically reduce the likelihood that it actually will. In fact, according to an influential study by Wharton professor Deborah Mitchell, prospective hindsight, the process of imagining that an event has already occurred increases our ability to identify why things will go right now or wrong by 30%. For me, the crystal ball method is most powerful when you drill into a few simple questions, ones that I've taken to asking my team, and which I encourage them to ask me too. 1. Imagine it's 1 week later, and you haven't actually started the task you intended to. What are the top 3 reasons why you didn't get to it? 2. What can you do to help mitigate the risk of those top 3 reasons derailing you? 3. Who can you ask for help in sticking to this commitment? 4. What action can you take right now that will help increase the odds that you'll actually do the task? This method works for almost any goal that we might struggle to attain, because the one thing you can be certain of is that some plans won't go according to plan. So you need to plan for that too. As General Eisenhower said, no battle was ever won according to plan, but no battle was ever won without one. Ask when. How often have you considered embarking on a task and thought, I don't know how I'd find the time? Time is, in the words of the philosophy writer Oliver Berkman, always already running out. For some of us more quickly than others. While we're often told that we all have the same 24 hours in a day, this obviously isn't true. There may be 24 hours in every day, but how many of those hours are within your control depends on an awful lot. A celebrity who has a chef, a driver, 2 full-time nannies and 3 personal assistants has more of their 24 hours to spend how they like. The rest of us mortals have to spend several hours each day on general life maintenance, commuting to work, being at work, commuting back, childcare, cooking, cleaning, shopping, doing the laundry. All this means that time feels like it's in incessantly short supply. As such, questions of time management are the final step in clearing the fog of uncertainty. So far, we've examined how to work out our overall purpose by asking the why and identifying specific end goals and tasks by asking the what. But there's one more question we haven't answered. If you don't know when you're doing something, chances are you won't do it. If you don't know when you're doing something, chances are you won't do it. On one level, asking when is about accepting your limitations. If you've only got a handful of free hours in your week, and you don't use them to every possible advantage according to the dictates of productivity, you're not necessarily procrastinating. Maybe you're just prioritizing. But when it comes to projects that we really do want to commit to, we need to find some hard answers to the question of when. And our first method for doing so originates in Boston University in the mid-2010s. Experiment 5, Implementation Intentions. In the autumn of 2015, flyers started appearing around Boston addressed to people who did not feel like they had enough time to exercise. The research group responsible wanted to understand the most effective ways to get people to do more exercise, so let in. People who responded were invited to take part in a study where they were set a goal to increase the number of steps they took each week. They were each given a Fitbit, the device that tracks health metrics like daily step count, and instructed to wear it for 5 weeks. Without the participants realizing, it had already been split into 2 groups. The first group was just given the Fitbit with no further instructions. The second group was given the Fitbit and a series of prompts, starting with a request to explain when they would add steps to their day. Every evening from then on, they were emailed with a request to review their schedules for the following day and identify the time slot when they could commit to the activity. The results of this tiny intervention were transformative. By the end of the 5 weeks, the first group who just got the Fitbit with no instructions saw virtually no change from their original step count. In contrast, the second group who got the Fitbit with specific prompts increased their steps from an average of 7,000 per day to almost 9,000. These little triggers to action are called implementation intentions, and the science of behavior change indicates they can be revolutionary. Implementation intentions have been the research focus of Peter Gollwitzer, a psychology professor at New York University. They offer a method that builds moments for your new behavior into your daily routine, just like the cues in that Boston study. If you decide before and when you're going to do something, you're much more likely to do it. According to Gollwitzer, the best formula for implementation intentions is a conditional statement. If X happens, then I will Y. If you want to practice mindfulness but aren't sure how to fit this practice into your schedule, create a trigger. When I get up for my regular midday cup of tea today, I will take 5 deep breaths before walking to the staff kitchen. If you want to turn your one-off act of eating fruit into a long-term behavior change, create a trigger. When I walk into the kitchen, I will eat an apple. If you want to spend more time with your family in the long term, create a trigger. When I get home from work, I will call my mum. These little triggers can have a remarkable effect. In 2006, Gollwitzer carried a meta-analysis involving more than 8,000 participants in 94 different studies, showing that these if-then prompts fundamentally alter people's long-term behavior. 12. It concluded that when we intentionally set an if-then statement for ourselves to follow, we're strengthening our mental representation of the situation in advance. When the trigger happens, it's hard to overlook it. You've already made it part of the mental model you use to navigate a situation. You no longer need to think about when you'll do it. You just do it. The result is remarkable. You no longer need to think about when you'll do it. You just do it. Experiment 6. Time blocking. There is an even more obvious way to find the time to do the things you value. But it's probably the most underused method there is, time blocking. Time blocking is a fancy way of saying, if you want to get something done, stick it in your calendar. But I'm not just talking about meetings, I'm talking about time for intensive work, time for admin, time to go for a run. It's pretty obvious. And yet it's the one simple tool that vast numbers of us fail to draw upon. I'm always dazzled by the number of people I know who are highly organized, highly motivated and have clear life goals, but have made no effort to put the things they most value into their calendars. This amazes me. I've learned the hard way that if you don't put the things you want to do into your calendar, they won't happen. I've often wondered why people are so resistant to making full use of a calendar. I guess people feel a little resistance to the idea of structuring your day to such an extent. Writing Go to the Gym or Write My Novel for now might seem too rigid and too structured for things we don't think of as work. But the truth is, structure gives you more freedom, not less. By carving out specific chunks of time for different activities, you're ensuring that you have time for everything that's important to you: work, hobbies, relaxation, relationships. You're not just reacting to whatever comes up or gets thrown at you during the day. Instead, you're designing your life according to your priorities. Think of time blocking as a budget for your time. Just like you allocate your income to different categories like rent, groceries, entertainment, and savings, you allocate your 24 hours to different activities. And just like monetary budgeting can give you financial freedom, time blocking can give you time freedom. If you're keen to get started with time blocking, I've created a 3-level system to help you do so. Level 1 is to time block specific tasks you've been avoiding. At this level, you start addressing those tasks that have been sitting on your to-do list for far too long. These could be anything from clearing out your email inbox to cluttering your workspace or finally getting around to that report you've been avoiding. And allocate a specific chunk of time to these tasks in your calendar. You might block out 9 to 10 on Tuesday for clearing your email inbox. Treat this time block as you would any other appointment. When the allocated time arrives, focus solely on the task at hand. Level 2 is time blocking most of your day. After you've had some practice with time blocking individual tasks, you should start your morning by creating a time block schedule for the entire day. Imagine waking up and planning your day like this: 7-8 am is for exercise, 8-9 am is for breakfast and family time, 9-11 am is for intense work on your most important project, 11-11:30 am is for emails, and so forth. You're essentially turning your to-do list into a schedule. By allocating specific time slots for each task, you're creating a clear plan for when and how your day's work will get done. Finally comes level 3, time blocking your ideal week. Here, you're not just planning a single day, you're planning the entire 7 days ahead of you. Ensure that all aspects of your life get the attention they deserve. Identify all the things that are important to you: work, family, hobbies, exercise, relaxation, personal development, etc. Then, carve out specific times in your week for each of them. For instance, you might decide that every weekday from 6-7 pm is dedicated to exercise, 7-8 pm is family dinner time, and 8-9 pm is for personal reading. Similarly, you might block out Monday and Tuesday mornings for deep work, Wednesday afternoon for team meetings, and Friday afternoon for personal development. The key is to create a balance that works for your ideal week, reflecting your priorities, ambitions, and personal circumstances. You might never actually stick to your ideal week. That's what I mean when I say it's ideal. Inevitably, things will come up that blow you off track, and that's okay. Time blocking isn't about creating a rigid schedule that stresses you out. It's about providing structure and ensuring there's dedicated time for what matters most to you. Once you have that, the fog of uncertainty will be that bit clearer. In summary, we get procrastination wrong. All too often, we approach procrastination by treating the symptoms rather than the underlying causes. And all too often, those causes relate to our mood. When we feel bad, we achieve less. So the Unblock method is about establishing what's really blocking your good mood and finding a way to eliminate it. The first emotional barrier is the simplest: uncertainty. The solution? To gain clarity about what you're actually doing. That involves asking why, and then using this to figure out your how. Next, ask what. That means an alternative approach to goal setting. Forget SMART goals. What you need are goals that feel nice near-term, input-based, controllable, and energizing. Last, ask when. If you don't know when you're going to do something, chances are you won't do it. One solution is to use implementation intentions, where your common daily habits become triggers for the things you intend to work on. For example, if I brush my teeth, then I'll stretch my hamstring. Fun fact, around 94% of people who listen to these books haven't subscribed yet. Be part of the top 6%. Chapter 5, Find Courage. Alex Honnold clung onto the rock by the tips of his fingers. Thousands of feet below, on the forested slopes of Yosemite Valley, his friends watched on in agony. Nothing attached him to El Capitan, the 3,000-foot rock wall that he was attempting to scale. But he couldn't go back, not now. The only option was to keep climbing. Free Solo, the documentary depicting Honnold's record-breaking attempt to climb El Capitan without ropes, became a phenomenon when it was released in 2018. The film invites us to reflect on a question we've all asked: why do some people dare to do things that most of us would never dream of? In this case, the answer may relate to a distinctive facet of Honnold's anatomy. He specifically has something the rest of us don't, or rather, he lacks something the rest of us have. In one scene, the documentary crew follow Alex to a doctor's office, where he gets an MRI scan. His doctor explains that one part of Alex's brain is underactive compared to those of most people, a tiny structure called the amygdala. The amygdala is the threat detector responsible for generating emotions that help us survive, emotions like fear. People who have a defect in their amygdala don't feel any fear at all, not with public speaking, not walking out into the middle of a busy road. It explains Hanol's ability to grip onto a vertical slab of smooth rock 3,000 feet in the air without feeling flustered. The good thing about the amygdala is that it helps us survive. If we didn't have the part of our brain edging us to avoid tigers and snakes and high-speed vehicles, the human species might not have lasted this long. The bad news is that the amygdala can also identify perceived but illusory threats. Researchers call this the amygdala hijack. It's what happens when the amygdala tells us to avoid and flee, even when there's no serious threat to our safety. The amygdala hijack underpins our second major blocker of fear. When presented with challenges that threaten our sense of safety, like meeting a group of strangers, or taking on a task that must be completed by a looming deadline, or having to pass an important exam, the amygdala interprets the task as a threat. Even if we know rationally that putting off the task will create more stress in the future, our brains are still wired to be more concerned with removing the threat in the present. The simplest way to achieve that? Do nothing. Have you ever hesitated to apply for a job or promotion out of a fear of rejection? Or put off attending a social event where you don't know many people? Or fail to make a start on a creative project because you worry you don't have the skills? That's your amygdala talking, every time. It isn't lack of talent or inspiration that's holding you back. It's fear. Fear is another negative emotion that blocks our productivity. It impedes our feel-good hormones and clouds our thinking and problem-solving. Procrastination is natural in the face of fear. And the solution? To find courage. To look at our fear, acknowledge it, and move past it. Now don't get me wrong. The goal of this chapter isn't to magically help you cure or get over your anxieties and self-doubts. Unless you're Alex Honnold, your fear may never be banished completely. But by developing the courage to face our fears and understand them, we can overcome the emotional barriers that might lead to a lifetime of procrastination. When fear places a lock on our abilities, courage holds the key. Know your fear. It took me 7 years to launch my business. I'd wanted to start a YouTube channel since 2010. But whenever I thought about shooting that first video, even when I'd blocked it in my calendar and sat down to film, I'd experienced some force preventing me from taking the plunge. At first, I thought I was putting it off because of my perfectionism. I had high standards, after all. I didn't want to produce videos that totally sucked. But looking back, I now realize I was wrong. I was a perfectionist about lots of things: exams, making friends, my magic tricks, but that didn't stop me from starting on them. Something else was holding me back: fear. The fear of failure, the fear of judgment, the fear of not being good enough. For years, the voice of fear in my head kept saying, "There's no way this is going to work, and you're not good enough to make this happen, so why bother trying?" In the end, I didn't create a video until 2017. Perhaps the main reason it took me almost a decade to overcome this fear was that I didn't understand it. I didn't have the words to explain what was stopping me filming those videos. I thought I was just being lazy, or not committed enough, and that fueled my self-doubt and negative self-talk. But once I started to understand the role that fear was playing in my life, I was able to identify it as the primary obstacle standing between me and my ambitions. Getting to know our fears is the first step towards overcoming them. Knowledge is power. Getting to know our fears is the first step towards overcoming them. Handled right, it could even take less than 7 years. Experiment 1, the emotion labeled the first way we can get to know our fear, was well demonstrated in 2016 by 88 arachnophobes, several scientists, and one Chilean rose-haired tarantula. With pounding hearts and sweating palms, the group of terrified volunteers lined up to meet one of the biggest spiders on Earth. One by one, they approached the 6-inch tarantula, its sprawling legspan casting an ominous shadow on the wall of its container. Until, at last, the most heart-stopping moment of all, they were asked to reach out and touch the spider with the tip of their index finger. These individuals were not motivated by masochism. They were participants in a groundbreaking study into the science of fear. One in particular, they wanted to explore the mysterious power of naming our fears and helping us surmount them. Before meeting the tarantula, the participants had been divided into several groups. Each was primed with some simple tactics by the UCLA scientists conducting the experiment. Some were told to distract themselves or to think about the spider in a less negative way. But one group was instructed to do something more specific, to label their emotions as they faced the tarantula. For example, "I feel anxious that the disgusting tarantula will jump on me." At the end of the study, all groups reported feeling distressed about the experience. But some fared better than others. And the group that fared best of all were those who had put their fears into words. They were substantially more likely to get close to the spider. And they reported feeling their fears gradually subside, to be replaced by a newfound sense of control. The sensation persisted for up to a week after the initial test. This study hints at a powerful way to see our fears for what they really are. The goal here is not to stop your amygdala from working completely, which would dramatically increase the chances of you being hit by a truck. Instead, it's to recognize when an amygdala hijack is happening. This technique is called effective labeling. Put simply, it's the act of putting your feelings into words, which forces you to identify and get to know the sensations you're experiencing. It works in two ways. First, it increases our self-awareness. By naming and acknowledging our fears, we cultivate a deeper self-awareness that helps us better understand our emotional patterns. Second, it reduces our rumination. Cyclical thoughts about our fears can make us even more convinced the fear is justified. When we label our emotions, we become better able to process and release them and so escape the cyclical thoughts that make us put things off. The trouble is, labeling our emotions isn't always straightforward. If you're anything like me, you might find it quite hard to even identify the fears and emotions that might be holding you back. We're very good at rationalizing reasonable reasons for not doing things. I'm not putting off starting my business because I'm scared of something. I just haven't found the right idea yet. I'm not making progress writing my novel because of fear. I just haven't had the time. So how can we get into the habit of naming our fears and so learning to process them? One method involves asking yourself a few questions. When you're procrastinating, say to yourself, what am I afraid of? Our core vulnerabilities and insecurities are often at the heart of procrastination. To work through them, we have to first identify them. Next, take it a step further and ask yourself, where does this fear come from? Is it a me reason or a them reason? Me reasons of fear is associated with your perception of your ability. For example, being scared that you're not good enough or not well prepared enough to start. Them reasons of fear is associated with how other people will react to what you do. For example, being scared that people won't like your work, or that they'll judge you for putting yourself out there. In each case, try to internally clarify what your fear is really about and where it's coming from. And what if you're still struggling to make sense of your fear dispassionately? One strategy I find helpful is to tell myself the experience I'm going through, but as a story about someone else. Of course I'm not scared, I tell myself. But if I were to write a fictional story about someone like me in my position, who was procrastinating on this task because they feared something, what might they be scared of? What fear might be holding this fictional character back from starting their task? Experiment 2, identity labels. Sometimes our fears are about something very specific, starting a project or confronting that giant tarantula. But sometimes our fears are broader, less about specific problems, more about our wider identities. We hand ourselves labels that make us too terrified to get started. I'm not a runner, I'm scared of maths, I don't like creative tasks. These identities can make us afraid to get started in just the same way that more specific fears can. Back in the 1960s, psychologist Howard Becker suggested that the labels society places on us profoundly affect the way we behave. At the time, Becker was focused on labels in the context of criminality. He found that people who are labeled as criminal after a first crime are much more likely to engage in criminal behavior again. By the 1990s, a series of studies had demonstrated that this problem didn't just affect criminality. Everywhere from schools to juvenile detention centers to the military, people who are given negative labels are much more likely to repeat troublesome behaviors. The labels we give ourselves, Becker showed, affect our behavior. Becker called his insight labeling theory 2, and it suggests that labels become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You probably experienced this yourself. You have one bad relationship and you conclude that you just aren't good at relationships at all. You fail one test and you label yourself an academic failure forever. You miss one deadline and label yourself a procrastinator. The good news is that labeling can also cut the other way. Just as a negative label can amplify our fears, a positive label can overcome them. For example, when I'm experiencing self-doubt, a favorite label for myself is lifelong learner. This label highlights my willingness to learn and grow. It also shifts my focus away from the negative aspects of procrastination, like shame and regret, and instead gives me the confidence to move forward and continue learning. A lifelong learner is constantly looking for new ways to improve themselves. A lifelong learner would never get stuck in a procrastination rut for long. You can draw upon this method yourself. When you find that you're putting things off, look at the labels you use. Are you over-identifying with the problem? How often do you say things like, I'm a chronic procrastinator, or I can't promise I'll get to it on time, I really procrastinate? And what might be a more positive way to identify? Someone who works hard. Someone who has achieved a lot before. Someone who meets their deadlines. This sounds like a tiny change, but it isn't. Labels are not just tags other people place on us. They're tools that help us make sense of who we are. If we can change our labels, we can often change our behavior. Reduce your fear. By the time Peter DeLeo arrived at the Ranch House Cafe in Alancha, Free, California, he was so haggard he was barely recognizable. He had been walking for 9 days. Almost 2 weeks had passed since a single-engine plane had crashed in the Sierra Nevada. Miraculously, all 3 passengers survived, but only DeLeo began looking for help. Scratched and bruised, he began to walk away from the wreckage to look for someone. Walking wasn't easy. The plane had crashed at an altitude of around 9,000 feet, and DeLeo had to hike along the snow-covered ridges of the Sierra Mountains. Eventually, he spotted lights from a ridge and stumbled his way down onto the highway in the dark, flagging down a passing car. When he arrived at the cafe, Talia refused medical treatment. It was more urgent to get a rescue team to search for his 2 passengers. He boarded a plane and led searchers back to the wreck. But it was too late, his friends were dead. What kept Talia alive on his trek to find help, while his 2 passengers perished where they waited? This is the question that survival psychologist John Leach has spent years trying to answer. 4 of his 2 dead companions warranted no more than a passing sentence in the press, Leach once wrote. Yet, one of these men had no more than superficial bruising following the crash. So why did he die? Material was there for shelter, fire could be made, water was available, and he would not have starved in 11 days. Leach's research on how people react in disasters reveals a core truth about human nature. When we're scared, we become paralyzed. During disasters, victims commonly show cognitive paralysis, which means they become unable to think, make decisions, or take action. The good news is that cognitive paralysis is something we can reduce. After all, not everyone experiences the incapacitating effects of fear. Some people like Peter Talia seem able to turn the adrenaline that makes some of us freeze into something more powerful, an ability to scale mountains, seek help, keep moving. With the right tools, we can diminish the effect that fear has on us. Experiment 3, the 10/10/10 rule. The first way we can reduce the power fear holds over us is by gaining some perspective. One of the reasons fear is so paralyzing is that we tend to catastrophize. In our heads, some minor setback becomes hugely important. Every potential failure has the potential to destroy our entire lives and define us forever. Take the following: you get rejected by someone you like. As a result, you decide that you're not lovable and will spend your life alone. You don't get hired for a job. As a result, you decide that you're not employable by any company and will end up jobless and homeless. You fail your first driving test. As a result, you decide that you're a bad driver and will never drive again. When you catch yourself catastrophizing in this way, try to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. With the right toolkit, we can come to realize things aren't as bad as they seem, and so the fear becomes less intense. The scientific name for this process is cognitive reappraisal, 5 changing the interpretation of a situation so that we feel better emotionally. The main goal of cognitive reappraisal is to shift our perspective on an event, thought, or feeling, allowing us to experience a more positive emotional response. A simple way to put cognitive reappraisal into practice is to remind yourself that the thing you're feeling so bad about probably won't matter that much in the future. You can do this by asking yourself the following 3 questions, which add up to what I call the 10/10/10 rule. Ask yourself, let's see how this would work in the previous examples. Trigger: you get rejected by someone you like. Will this matter in 10 minutes? I might still feel a bit down, I might not want to show my face to that person. Will this matter in 10 weeks? Maybe, but I'll probably be less upset by then. So much could happen. Will this matter in 10 years? Probably not at all. I'll meet many people between now and then who could completely change my life. Trigger: you don't get hired for a job. Will this matter in 10 minutes? Probably. I might feel pretty low for the rest of the day. Will this matter in 10 weeks? Probably not, because I'm going to apply to a bunch of other jobs by then. Will this matter in 10 years? Definitely not. Few people become successful in their careers without any setbacks, and I'll learn to see this as one small hiccup. Trigger: you fail your first driving test. Will this matter in 10 minutes? Maybe. I'll have to tell the news to my instructor and deal with a bit of embarrassment. Will this matter in 10 weeks? Probably not. I'll have booked another test and hopefully pass by then. Will this matter in 10 years? Definitely not. I'll probably forget all about the shame and embarrassment. It could just be a funny story, if I remember it at all. The 10/10/10 rule helps us recognize the magnitude of the problem we're stressing out about. Usually, we discover that the failures we're worried about now aren't the ones that will always define us, and that the fears we have now won't always carry such significance. Experiment 4, the confidence equation. Fear doesn't always come in such dramatic forms as my life will be ruined forever, of course. Some of the fear we experience is the low, creating sense of self-doubt that stands between us and our goals, the fear that we're just not good enough. I often think of this form of self-doubt as a kind of suspended animation. We're caught hanging between 2 mutually exclusive beliefs. Part of us thinks, I really want to do this, but another part of us says, there's no way I can. The result is paralysis. For example, when I procrastinate writing, which is often, it's because I'm suspended between 2 ideals. On the one hand, there's a genuine desire to write my book, to create something beautiful, to help people. And on the other, there is a little voice in my head saying, anything I write is going to be garbage anyway, so there's no point in doing it, or I'm just not a good writer. Why am I even trying this? There are certainly some cases in which doubt is useful and warranted. I've got plenty of self-doubt about my ability to pilot a plane or to design a rocket. But most of our doubts are usually less rational. Usually, when self-doubt causes procrastination, it's not because there is something real there. It's the result of perception. My belief in my own ability is less than the ability I believe is required. If you're into mathematical notation, you might write it like this: self-confidence equals perception of ability, perception of standards. If we believe our ability is higher than the standard needed, then we're confident. If we believe our ability is lower than the standard needed, then we're doubtful. What does all this mean for reducing the effects of self-doubt? Well, with the right tools you can rebalance the confidence equation in a way that sparks action. We talked about increasing our confidence in the chapter on power, and those tips can go a long way to removing self-doubt. But even as a self-professed productivity guru, I continue to deal with procrastination caused by self-doubt on a daily basis. In the course of writing this book, self-doubt has been the primary driver of writer's block. There have been days, even weeks, when I felt like I simply can't do it. In these moments, building your confidence may not be the easiest solution. Confidence is certainly nice to have, and certainly makes starting a task easier. But if you simply want to spark yourself to stop procrastinating, you might need a simpler way out. In my case, that often involves a simple method, not miraculously overcoming my low confidence, but transforming it into a non-issue. My favorite method is simple. Just try asking yourself, how confident do I actually need to feel to just get started with this? Could I just get started even though I'm feeling unconfident? In most cases, the answer is invariably yes. Of course, if I were asked to perform neurosurgery, I'd need to feel pretty confident in my abilities to get started. But realistically, for day-to-day areas where I actually experience self-doubt, going to the gym, working on my business, writing this book, I don't actually need to feel confident to get started with them. Make a start. You won't need to get perfect for a long time yet. So I can make a start, even if it's a shaky one. I don't need to feel like a Schwarzenegger-style bodybuilder to work out for an hour. I don't need my first crack at my business strategy to be a work of visionary corporate genius. And I definitely don't need the first draft of my book to be a masterpiece. When you're trying something new, the idea that you should only begin when you feel confident to begin is a blocker all of its own. The solution? Just do it, even if you feel like you're doing it badly. Make a start. You won't need to get perfect for a long time yet. Overcome your fear. As the glow of the stage lights began to illuminate the arena, Adele realized her palms were damp with sweat. She was about to face a sea of thousands of people. She had done this a few times before, but this time she was terrified. The fear of performing in front of such a massive audience threatened to engulf her completely. Before Adele became a global icon, she was a talented artist struggling to conquer her fear of performing. It was during one of her early concerts, when the anxiety threatened to derail her career, that she stumbled upon a technique for overcoming fear that would change her life forever. Adele took her inspiration from Beyoncé. In 2008, Beyoncé named her third studio album after her alter ego, Sasha Fierce. Beyoncé said that Sasha Fierce was a persona that she could channel on stage to become more confident, more powerful, and free from inhibitions. Sasha Fierce is the fun, more sensual, more aggressive, more outspoken side and more glamorous side that comes out when I'm working and when I'm on the stage, she said. Inspired by Beyoncé, Adele created her own alter ego, Sash Carter, an amalgamation of Sasha Fierce and the legendary country singer Gene Carter. Sasha Carter was everything Adele aspired to be on stage, fearless, unapologetically bold, and radiating confidence. By stepping into the persona of Sasha Carter, she was able to distance herself psychologically from her fears and become the confident and powerful performer she had always dreamed of being. Adele's alter ego hints at the final way we can move through the paralyzing effects of fear. One of the most common forces that drives our procrastination is the fear of being seen. Whether it's giving a presentation, sharing a new video we made with strangers on the internet, or going to a party where we might not know everyone, fear of being seen or found out for who we truly are can keep us from growing outside our comfort zone. But what we're afraid others will notice about us are mistakes, small missteps. Our worst qualities aren't typically what we notice in others. When we look at ourselves, these things seem a lot bigger and more important than they really are. And this calls for a final way to get through the effects of fear. So far in this chapter, we've talked about knowing our fears and reducing their hold over us. But for the most daunting tasks, these methods might not be enough. We can't eradicate all our fears. We need to overcome them. That means finding a way to move from fear to courage. And it begins with changing the way that you're seen by the most important person in your life, you. Experiment 5, Stop Spotlighting. For me, this process began at my friend Jake's dinner party. It was a lively Saturday evening at Jake's house, and the room was buzzing with laughter and lively conversation. Jake had been planning the party for weeks. It was a big deal. Everyone around the table knew that he lived off Uber Eats day to day. Cooking up a buffet of delicious food for his friends was unprecedented. Therein lay an opportunity for a hilarious joke, I thought. As Jake dished up, I waited eagerly for a lull in the conversation, and as he piled the glorious dishes on the dining table, I spotted my chance. "Thanks for ordering all this delicious food on Uber Eats, Jake," I said. There was a moment's silence. And then a lot more silence. Nobody laughed. Then some clinks of forks and knives against plates. My face flushed red and I suddenly felt hot. That hadn't gone well. It wasn't funny, and even worse, I'd probably offended my host who had been slaving away in the kitchen for hours. Later in the evening, still paralyzed by embarrassment, I had a mild freak out to my friend Catherine. Had I utterly humiliated myself? Had I alienated all of my friends in one fell swoop? Would nobody invite me to dinner ever again? She looked at me with surprise. She hadn't even realized I'd told a joke. I was busy helping myself to the food, she said. His cooking is surprisingly good, isn't it? My imaginary faux pas taught me a powerful lesson. I'd overestimated the degree to which others noticed and judged my actions. As the night continued, I looked around the room and realized that the world wasn't focused on my every move. Everyone was far too busy attending to their own concerns, laughter, and conversation. I'd fallen prey to an interesting phenomenon known as the spotlight effect. 8. We're highly attuned to what others think of us. This makes sense as social creatures. Our amygdala is always on the hunt for threats to our status. But this means that we spend our lives believing a spotlight is always trained on us, and that everyone around is constantly looking at us, analyzing our behaviors, and passing judgment on our worth as human beings. In a series of papers published in the early 2000s, psychology professor Thomas Jelovich and his co-authors proved time and again that individuals have a remarkable tendency to overestimate the degree to which others are thinking about or judging them. People are often anxious about how the tiniest details of their actions and appearance are likely to come across to others, he writes. Some of this anxiety may be misplaced. Many of the details of our appearance or performance are likely to be lost on the audience whose opinions we so assiduously court. The truth is, everyone is concerned mostly about themselves, and how they're coming across. They are not spending much time, if any, thinking about us. What this suggests is that the spotlight effect can be reduced with a simple reminder that, well, no one cares. And when fear is holding you back from doing something, this can be profoundly liberating. No one cares if my first few YouTube videos are terrible and cringy. No one cares if I write blog posts that are a bit rambly because I haven't had much experience of writing. No one cares if I show up to this salsa dancing class as a total beginner without a partner. No one cares if my belt doesn't match my shoes when I attend this party. The mindset of no one cares can be totally transformative. It's one of the simplest methods I've identified to reduce my anxiety-related procrastination. This isn't a magic bullet, mind. Dealing with fear is a lifelong endeavor, and I don't expect that after reading this book your fear of what other people will think of you and your work will disappear completely. But there is a healthy level of fear. And then there is a level that paralyzes us. Understanding the spotlight effect means you can just make a start right now. Nobody cares if it's rubbish apart from you. Experiment 6, the Batman effect. Sometimes, remembering that no one cares isn't enough to overcome our fears of public humiliation. When Adele stepped out into the arena, she was probably freaking out because, frankly, quite a lot of people did care. In these moments, we can take a leaf out of Sasha Carter's book. Adele's method of stepping into an alter ego can be a powerful tool for overcoming fear. There's even a fun scientific name for it, the Batman effect. The Batman effect was first identified by a team of researchers led by Professor Rachel White at the University of Pennsylvania. White and her team were curious about whether adopting an alter ego could improve a child's approach to a task. They designed a study that involved a group of kids aged 4 to 6 years old. The children were given a task that required them to concentrate and resist the temptation to engage in a more enjoyable activity nearby. The children were divided into 3 groups. One group was given no specific instructions. The second group was asked to reflect on their own feelings and thoughts. And the third group was asked to think of themselves as a superhero or another character they admired, like Batman or Dora the Explorer. The children were then monitored as they attempted to complete the task. These researchers chanced upon an intriguing insight. The children who were asked to imagine themselves as superheroes or other characters exhibited significantly better self-control, focus, and perseverance than those in the other 2 groups. This finding highlights the potential of the Batman effect as a tool for overcoming our fears of failure and in turn overcoming our procrastination. When we embody the traits of a fearless, confident alter ego, we can tap into a reservoir of courage and determination that we might not feel our regular selves possess. I've been using the Batman effect to overcome my own insecurity for years. I find it particularly handy when it comes to speaking in public. Often, I'm plagued with insecurity and self-doubt, and even though I've been delivering classes and presentations for years, I sometimes feel the fear associated with putting myself out there. In this context, my alter ego is young Charles Xavier, aka Professor X from the X-Men series, played by James McAvoy. My physical trigger for stepping into the identity of Charles Xavier is when I put on my fake glasses. That's why I still wear glasses in many public settings even though I've had laser eye surgery. They help me adopt a professional, intellectual alter ego that I need to overcome the imposter syndrome I often have when giving a speech. You need not be as avid an X-Men fan to use this method for your own fears. Think of something you've been putting off due to self-doubt, taking up a new hobby, or perhaps launching a side hustle. Now, identify an alter ego who would have no trouble with it. Who embodies the qualities you want to have, qualities like confidence, bravery, determination, or even dare I say discipline. Next, step into your alter ego. Find a quiet space where you can be alone and take a few moments to visualize yourself transforming into the alternative you. Imagine yourself adopting their posture, voice and mindset. The more you practice, the easier it will become to channel the Batman effect when you need to overcome fear or procrastination. And finally, I find it helpful to create a mantra or affirmation, a short, empowering phrase that represents your alter ego's mindset. Repeat this mantra to yourself when you need a boost of courage or motivation. I am confident. I am fearless. I am unstoppable. These mantras might sound cheesy, but they're remarkably effective. They remind us that we or our alter egos have reserves of strength that we can barely imagine. In summary, our second emotional blocker is even thornier fear. If you've ever put off applying for a daunting job or asking someone you like on a date, you've encountered this particular monster. The solution isn't to get rid of fear, though instead, it's to develop the courage to face up to it. That courage comes from three sources. The first is to understand your fear. Ask yourself, why have I not started on that task or project yet? What am I afraid of? Where does this fear come from? The second is to reduce your fear. Our fears are often blown out of proportion. Ask yourself these questions to prevent yourself from catastrophizing. Will this matter in 10 minutes? Will this matter in 10 weeks? Will this matter in 10 years? The third is to overcome your fear. If you're scared of what other people think, remind yourself that most people are not, in fact, thinking about you. We're a self-conscious species, but we're not usually a judgmental one. If you found value in this, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow and brings more books to you. Chapter 6 gets started. In 1684, Isaac Newton embarked upon his most ambitious work yet. Over the next 18 months, he would work through the night, often foregoing sleep and food, to complete his magnum opus, Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica. When the Principia was published in July 1687, it represented the first scientific attempt to explain how objects move through space. At its heart was a simple observation, pithily summarized in Newton's first law of motion, often called the law of inertia. An object at rest stays at rest, while an object in motion stays in motion unless acted on by an external unbalanced force. In other words, if an object is still, it will remain still. If an object is moving, it will continue moving unless another force like gravity or a resistance prevents it from doing so. By the time Newton died 4 decades later, many of his contemporaries realized that the Principia was a masterpiece, the greatest ever attempt to describe the physical properties of the natural universe. But what they probably didn't realize is that Newton's first law described one of the core curiosities of human behavior too. Because here's the thing, the law of inertia applies just as much to productivity as to physics. So far, we've encountered 2 major blockers that make us feel worse and procrastinate more: uncertainty, which makes us confused about what we need to do to get started, and fear, which makes us so anxious that we don't feel we can begin. But our third and final blocker is perhaps the trickiest of all: inertia. As Newton recognized, it takes way more energy to get started than it does to keep going. When you're doing nothing, it's easy to carry on doing nothing. And when you're working, it's much easier to carry on working. When you feel like you've tried everything to properly motivate yourself but you're still procrastinating, you need one final boost to get started. Inertia flattens our emotional landscape. It makes us feel helpless and stuck, and saps our feel-good emotions. But it can be overcome. I like to think of the principle of inertia as a literal hump on a road. Imagine you're about to cycle down a hill. You've got your helmet on, your gears are well oiled, and you're itching to get started. There's just one problem. You need to cycle uphill a little before you get to the long slope down. It's going to take a burst of energy to get over the hump, and exerting that energy might not be the most pleasant thing in the world. But once you've overcome it, you'll be cycling downhill, the wind in your hair, feeling better than ever and gliding on home. Reduce friction, so how can we get over this hump? The first method involves looking at the world around us and trying to work out what's making it so difficult to get started. You might find that some little tweaks to your environment make all the difference. To see what I mean, we can turn to the work of Marleen Huitink, a researcher who led a Dutch study into the psychology of vegetable shopping. 1. Huitink and her team had been tasked by a supermarket chain and several public organizations to come up with cheap ways to improve population health. To do so, they developed a simple method to explore how our environment affects our shopping decisions. On some days of the week, treatment days, the researchers added a green inlay in the shopping trolleys that covered half of the bottom of a trolley. The green inlay indicated a space where shoppers would place their vegetables. The inlay also had a message printed on it, informing them about what other people in the supermarket do when it comes to buying vegetables. One message read, "The 3 most popular vegetables in this supermarket are cucumber, avocado, and bell pepper." Another read, "Most customers pick at least 7 vegetables." On other days of the week, controlled days, the researchers removed the green inlays. The researchers wanted to test whether these subtle and crucially cheap tweaks in our environment, like the green inlay and the message in the shopping trolley, would change shoppers' behavior.
Thanks for listening to this audiobook so far. We want to be compliant with the copyright law. So this will be the end of this audiobook. If you want to have access to the full content, consider to be part of our Patreon membership, and if you find this book interesting, check the link below to purchase it.